Well, good evening. My name is Erica A. Stewart, and I am calling the regular meeting of the City Council to order and to state that we are all present today in person. Vice Mayor Andy Pease, will you please lead the Pledge of Allegiance?
Please rise as you're able.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. So today, before we start all of our business, we get to do a little bit of fun, which is an Arbor Day proclamation. I believe that Walter Galt will be accepting this on behalf of the city's Community Development Department. I will go ahead and read this off and then meet you down at the podium for you to say a few words. Make sure I have the right one. Good. So whereas in 1872, Arbor Day was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska. Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and the world. The city of San Luis Obispo celebrated its first Arbor Day in 1983, and now in 24, the city continues to work towards its goal of planting 10,000 new trees by 2035. Because wherever trees are planted, they add beauty to our city, provide a source of joy and spiritual renewal, thus increasing the environmental, social, and economic sustainability of our city. Whereas trees can be a solution to combating climate change by reducing erosion and slowing stormwater runoff, slowing spreading and sinking rainfall, to increase groundwater recharge, cutting heating and cooling costs, moderating the temperature, cleaning the air, producing oxygen, and providing habitat for wildlife. The city of San Luis Obispo has been recognized as a Tree City USA for 41 years by the National Arbor Day Foundation and desires to continue its tree planting and urban forestry program. Now, therefore, I, Erica A. Stewart, Mayor of the City of San Luis Obispo, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim November 2nd, 2024 as Arbor Day in the City of San Luis Obispo, and urge all community members to support efforts to protect our trees and woodlands and to support our city's urban forestry program. And further, I urge all community members to plant trees to promote the well-being of present and future generations.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart, for the proclamation. My name is Walter Galt, and I'm the Urban Forestry Program Coordinator and City Arborist. My position is new for the city, and it's new for the Community Development Department, and it represents the city's commitment to its urban forest, its willingness to adapt in order to meet its urban forestry goals, and the need for continued public service regarding trees. To acknowledge and celebrate this proclamation, I'm excited to announce that the city's Arbor Day event will happen on Saturday, November 2nd at Sinsheimer Park. This event kicks off the tree planting season, which will last through the spring. Please join us in planting 25 trees from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Saturday, November 2nd at Sinsheimer Park. In addition to tree planting, the event will consist of educational speakers and hundreds of free tree giveaways. I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope that many of us can come out to help plant. So next we have the city manager report. Sorry, a little last minute details changing. City manager report and City Manager McDonald.
Thank you very much. We'll pull up, we have a few slides to highlight a few items of interest for the community. First, we are really excited to announce, if folks haven't seen it already out on the road, after 5 long years, our double-decker bus was put back into service at the beginning of this month. Many thanks from our wonderful Public Works contract coordinator staff who did and coordinated extensive tree trimming along the Laguna Tripper route over the past few months to make sure that our double-decker will be able to provide service along this route unimpeded and really put this double-decker bus back into service. We'll continue to run it on this Tripper route and look for other ways to use it within our fixed route system, but just really excited to announce that this is back on the street. It's a wonderful amenity to add to our transit system. Next, we wanted to highlight our annual Boo Bash event that's happening on Friday, October 25th at Meadow Park. Come enjoy games, a photo booth, a family-friendly movie, and experience the haunted house that we've set up there with 3 different options based on your scare thermometer. The first is a sensory-free haunted house between 4 and 4:30 p.m., then a lights-on kid-friendly haunted house between 4:30 to 5:30, and then your traditional, I suppose, more scary haunted house from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. So come on out and find which of those 3 you really fall into, maybe all 3, who knows. The event is free, and we are suggesting that canned food donations be brought for us to support the local slow food bank as part of our contribution. Kind of following along that theme, we wanted to announce and make sure folks were aware that our solid waste and recycling program is hosting the city's first ever Pumpkin Smash event on November 1st. So rather than smashing them anywhere else, such as a street or a neighbor's property, bring them to Emerson Park from 3 to 6 p.m. and really experience that satisfaction of throwing your carved pumpkin into a bin that's been provided, a large green bin provided by San Luis Garbage. It'll help us all learn and see how the compost process starts working. Attendees will also enjoy kid-friendly compost demonstrations, booths from local agency partners, food trucks, lawn games, and you can take some compost home for free to use in your at-home gardens. For more information on this free event or to volunteer, please go to our website at slowcity.org. And if you can't attend, don't worry. You can recycle or compost your own your pumpkin at your home by putting it in your green cart. So again, it goes in the green and in the bins and not in the streets. Next, we wanted to really just say thank you to our entire fire department staff and the community as well for coming out for our open house held on Saturday at Station 1. It was a really successful year and helped us to highlight Fire Prevention Week. We think we had about 200 to 300 attendees on Saturday with food, giveaways, games, museum tours, and 2 auto extrication demos. I know Councilmember Marks and I were able to catch at least part of one of those. It helped us all see how the process works of how our staff get people out of vehicles after they've crashed. It helped people learn about fire prevention as well, and then meet our wonderful firefighters and staff. So thank you all for coming out and supporting that process and learning. We also wanted to provide an update both for council and the community about our short-term rental enforcement process. So just a quick background, in San Luis Obispo, homestays are allowed as long as they are permitted via a homestay permit. They're only allowed in a homeowner's primary residence, and dedicated vacation rentals are not allowed. So in essence, you need to live in your home and then rent it out on occasion or rent a room. But it needs to be your primary residence and not be solely just there for a vacation rental. The city has entered into a contract with a company called Rentalscape. It's a commonly used platform that can help us identify unpermitted homestays, really even when an address isn't listed on the website. It can also help us identify how many nights a homestay has been booked and really whether any transit occupancy tax has been owed and potentially not paid. Just a reminder that does apply regardless of whether you are permitted. But we, of course, really need all of our homestays to be permitted. As the city works to bring Rentalscape on board, we're also continuing to work on other enforcement activities related to short-term rentals, and that includes staff in both our finance and community development departments reaching out to existing permit holders and asking them to confirm on an annual basis that they still reside in the home and to provide that information and evidence to the city. So if anybody's received one of those letters and has not responded to it, please do that. We are taking next steps on the enforcement kind of track to help us make sure we are having everybody comply with our rules. Because through Rentalscape, now that we have it we're getting it all on board and operating, we believe we have about 100 unpermitted homestays or vacation rentals in our city. Each of those requires some type of enforcement action and steps that are typically take a fair amount of time and are multi-stepped, and so it is going to take a fair amount of resources and city staff time for us to get a handle on that. So we are developing a plan of action for how we are going to propose tackling that large number of unpermitted rentals. So just wanted to give this update to everybody, let you know what we're working on, and to get the word out again to the community that if you are renting out a room or your home on a less than a month-to-month basis, then you do need a permit. You do need to reside in the home as your primary residence. And so please come into compliance. We welcome you to come in. And we look forward to working with you to make sure all of that is up to speed. And then finally, we wanted to highlight some items that are coming forward. As part of the city manager report, you'll be seeing more of these just updates so people see what's coming. We especially wanted to note that our parking program technology roadmap will be coming forward on November 12th. So our meeting schedule is a little different over the next few weeks. We don't hold our regular meeting at the first week of November because of the election. So we are having 2 back-to-back meeting dates in November on the 12th and the 19th. And on the 12th, we are including our parking program technology roadmap. It will talk about all of the technology-related items that we've been planning for and trying to program out in a really comprehensive way through our parking program, including our app one, the app that we anticipate moving forward with, our gated systems, our parking pay stations. We will also be talking about cameras in our existing garages and future Cultural Arts District parking structure. And we will include it's kind of adjacent issue, which is fencing in those structures as well. So just wanted to make sure folks were aware that that's coming forward, along with a number of other items, including a hearing on an item that will be coming up on your consent, and then a discussion of our Mission Plaza enhancement project, which is a project that we've been working toward over the past year plus and trying to get bids on that. So more to come, but wanted to highlight those items for everybody tonight.
Wonderful, thank you. And I really appreciate this addition of the upcoming agenda items, not just for this one, really the next kind of 3 months are a little wonky because we have the December is always a little bit off because we have the 1st and 3rd. Typically we don't have the 3rd, we're gonna have the 1st, we have the 10th. It gets a little bit confusing. And then on the January, typically you miss the 1st Tuesday because of, and we push it back to the 2nd Tuesday because of New Year's Day. So these next 3 kind of are not as consistent as normal, and really appreciate you sharing what's coming up.
Yeah.
We as the City Council typically get the agenda forecast. It's public, of course, as well, but I think this is something that helps everyone be able to see what's forecasted for coming up. So next we have, we have the liaison reports and communications, which is typically, liaison reports, not communications, which is typically our second to last item. We moved it up since August 27th because we wanted to make sure that the community understood some of the some of the nonprofits and boards that we all sit on, regional boards. So we're updating those reports now. And then if you have additional items you went to, like our Housing Authority grand opening opening. We'll talk about that later at the end of the meeting. So we'll move forward, and at this time, none of my items came up. I will move on to Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you so much. I'd like to provide a brief update from the SLOCOG meeting, the Council of Governments, which is our transportation body. They hosted a slow safety forum last a week and a half ago, and there were 80 people. It was in attendance from all over the county, all walks of life, from public health to road engineers to the district attorney to SLO PD, et cetera. So really informative, really helpful, and we averaged 30 deaths in car collisions a year in this county. So we're working on that, and it's not just the road design, it's education and infrastructure and all those improvements. And I wanted to give a heads up that we're doing something new this year. SLOCOG, in partnership with others, is doing a World Day of Remembrance. It'll be November 17th from noon to 1:30 at the SLO County Courthouse. And there'll be some speakers and some remembrance. So just want to let folks know ahead that that is coming up. That's the main thing I wanted to report.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Francis.
Thank you, Mayor. So a couple of things, since I unfortunately finally got that COVID and missed the last meeting. I know that Councilmember Marks mentioned that I went to the Air Pollution Control District in her place on September 18th. And she talked a little bit about the replacement of gas-powered lawn equipment. There's going to be a one-for-one replacement with the up to $30,000 per institution or organization or business that wants to switch over to all electric lawn equipment, which is really exciting. Also, one additional item that we added into that was a local incentive, similar to some of the local incentives that were for buying e-bikes here back in the day. This is a local incentive, meaning a little extra will come your way if you buy your electric lawn equipment from a local business. And all of this will start on December 1st. There was also a CAPSLO meeting that unfortunately I also missed with COVID, but some things that would be interesting to the public was there was an update, the annual update on the 40 Prado operations. And some of the statistics that were presented was that they, this last year, provided over 40,989 shelter nights. 4,000 of those were child bed nights. The warming station was open for 160 nights, and there were 3,000 safe parking nights. So we're really working as a county to tackle this issue, but it's a big issue, and it was heartwarming to see that there were 548 volunteers that stepped up to help with this, and that was about 3,000 hours of volunteering, which was pretty fantastic. Last thing here, I had a Nacimiento Commission meeting, which is concerning one of our water supplies for the city. We had an emergency meeting because we had to do an emergency repair on some of our pipelines. Unfortunately, it was experiencing some corrosion around Santa Margarita and the Under Creek crossing, so there was an approval for some additional funds from the Nacimiento Commission so we could get that up and running again. And that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. I'm on the Air Pollution Control District board. And today there was a meeting of the hearing board, which was looking at another set of issues about the all-terrain vehicles in the Oceano Dunes. I don't know what the outcome of it was. In fact, it may be going on right now, or it may have just gone on this afternoon. But whenever there is an appeal of a permit that the Air Pollution Control District staff puts out, that appeal does not go to the policy board, it goes to the hearing board. And so that's kind of a check and balance. In terms of the Integrated Waste Management Authority, we did not meet in October. There was nothing to meet about. That's amazing. So I will say, though, that we are in escrow for the purchase of a larger building. Right now, the staff is in 2 different buildings, so we're going to be able to be in one that's still not too far away. It's over there on Choro. The Airport Land Use Commission, I'm the liaison there, and there was no item that really relates to the city of San Luis Obispo, so I didn't get involved with that. And Central Coast Clean Energy, 3CE, I think we talked about that the last time that we met. They had the annual conference up in Aptos, which was great. So 3CE is the organization that gives us all clean green energy, which costs less than what you get from PG&E. It's a 5-county organization. And so I'm on the policy board, and the mayor is the alternate. So the only climate-related event that I went to isn't really part of 3CE, but I did help out. I'm the alternate for Michelle Shorsman as a liaison to the Slow Climate Coalition, which meets about once a month, I guess. And these are volunteers and people who are just interested in trying to combat climate change. And they often do come up with public comment for the 3CE Policy Board and the Community Action Council. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schwarzman.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Councilmember Marks, for attending the Slow Climate Coalition for me last week. They had their meeting and I was out of town on work business, so I wasn't able to attend, so appreciate you covering that. And let's see, the 2 out of my 4 committee assignments have met or are about to meet, the Climate Coalition, as well as the HSOC Executive Committee will be meeting tomorrow. And the thing of note on that agenda is the recommendation to the full HSOC on what's called a COC Builds grant. And what we're doing is they receive sort of letters of interest from entities that want to apply for the Builds grant, and the HSOC decides who we're going to apply as a county and the applicant at the same time to the state, and the COC Builds grant applicant that is being recommended is the Kiowakin project. So tell them what HSOC is. Yes, the Homeless Services Oversight Committee. Sorry about that. So I think that's it for me for my liaison reports.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So next we have the public comment period for items not on the agenda. And I see we have a full room and some new faces, so I'd just like to give a little bit of a heads up as to what public comment is this time. Again, it's for items that are not on the agenda later. And one thing that's sometimes a little bit challenging is we hear people's input at this time period and we say thank you so much and that's the end of it. And sometimes that feels a little cold. So I just wanted to share that because we can't discuss items that are not on the agenda off the agenda time, that's why we kind of just take that in. And if there's something that needs to be addressed quickly, we will highlight that to staff and they may address that with someone right away. Maybe something that's dangerous or concerning. So before we get going, also just like to make sure we have the kind of lay of the land of how it works. We like to make sure that we listen first. We respect different opinions. It's okay if we disagree, and that we show courtesy. We criticize constructively and debate the policy, not the person. That's just a little bit about how we like to run the public comment. And City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
Yes, we do, but before I call the 2 speakers, I want to address everybody on the screen can see the new red. That's our timer now.
That's new.
Yes, it's new. It will turn colors. It will flash when it's counting down so that you know when you're getting done, and you will hear a bell when your time is up. But this is so I don't have to switch so many screens.
Nice, that's fancy.
Okay,
Also, do want to say one last thing. If you did have a burning issue you want to talk about right now, but you forgot to put in a slip, there's still time. There's a public comment speaker slip right behind Mr. Herman or right out front. So if you were dying to talk about something and you forgot to fill that out, let us know ASAP. And for those who haven't been here yet, I forgot, we should mention, if you really are in support of something, please do the applause in that way. If you're not in support of something, feel free to do the boo, but we don't usually shout and clap in the council chambers. So just thought we'd share that and moving forward.
Okay, so I have 2 speaker cards at the moment, David Yohe and Weston Patrick.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I have addressed you before, and my name is David Yo. I am in Morro Bay, and I come tonight to thank you and to apologize. Back around March or so, I had come with some people that I had heard were bringing you a resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza, and I was not part of that group, but I came in support. And while I was here, I had the opportunity to see how you treated some of those people. And it was very, very negative. And the way that you spoke to some of the people was offensive. And that instilled in me a desire to want to join in. And so I want to thank you, because since then, I've been quite active. I've addressed Mr. Carbajal in person a couple of times. I spoke with you one time. I learned the word purview. Thank you very much. It was disturbing. And what is going on is disturbing. And we have now escalated from Gaza to Lebanon. So thank you very much. Your help in support would have been very, very nice. But since you chose not to, I understand. So now I must apologize. I'm sorry that I gave you any humanitarian thought that you would even consider helping the people of this community, the Palestinians, who feel uncomfortable about everything that's going on. And I really, really, really would have liked to have known that you were in support of those people, but I was wrong. So I have to apologize for putting that pressure on you, because I know how difficult that must have been. Things have gotten worse, and they're going to get worse, and they're going to get worse for us, because the people who have been bombing hospitals and murdering children are now spreading that to Lebanon, and they're going to continue. And when the Lebanese return and the Iranians return that, you have given them permission. Hospitals, journalists, and medical people are open targets. So if you could have been in support, I might have enjoyed that. I might have thanked you for that. But as it is, I'm not able to do that. And I hope you continue making a Cupcake Day and Arbor Day, which has always been. So why is it special today now? Because you chose. Thank you very much. I hope not to see too much of you from here on out.
Next, please.
Weston Patrick.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the Council. My name is Weston Patrick. I serve as the Secretary of External Affairs for ASI Student Government at Cal Poly. I come to you tonight to represent the ASI External Affairs Committee. I wanted to take this opportunity to recognize the importance of and reaffirm our commitment to the university and citywide partnership in the 2024 and 2025 academic year. Our committee looks forward to strengthening this relationship in the coming year and is always looking for ways to collaborate with the city of San Luis Obispo. We have a vested interest in staying involved with city issues that affect Cal Poly students and the betterment of our community. We hope to additionally help in further engaging Cal Poly students with local leaders about issues that matter most to them. We thank you for your time this evening, and we look forward to a productive and positive year. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other speakers?
That was the last one.
Okay. So next we have the consent agenda, which is for items that are considered to be non-controversial. So if you have a comment for something that is on the consent agenda, this is your time to turn in that speaker slip. And I'll ask my colleagues, is there anything you would like to poll? Vice Mayor Pease.
Yes, I'd like to poll item 5K for the scheduling of the rest of the calendar year for a separate vote and discussion.
Perfect, thank you. Councilmember Shorsman.
Yes, I'd like to pull 5G for some questions of staff.
And 5G, just for those who may not be following along, is the final acceptance of public improvements for Tract 2428 Phase 3, a residential subdivision at 3000 Kaimalva. Councilmember Francis.
No additional items to pull. Just wanted to point out the appointment of Emily McBride as the ASI representative to the Mass Transportation Committee. Just incredibly grateful to ASI for helping to bring more people, especially Cal Poly folks, onto our advisory bodies, and wanted to thank Emily for her service to the advisory body.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm always so grateful for everyone who's willing to sit on our advisory bodies and really discuss some of the difficult and interesting issues that we have. I also wanted to bring attention to 5C, which is the update to the trip reduction incentive program, and thank the Sustainability Office and the Human Resources Office for helping bring this forward to us at this time as well. And so if there is any public comment on any of the items except for the 3000 Kaimalva tract and the City Council meeting schedule, can you let me know?
There are not.
Okay, so can I have a motion? Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, I move to approve the consent agenda minus items 5K and 5G.
Perfect, and Councilmember Shorsman.
I'll go ahead and second that.
Wonderful, can we have roll call?
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Shorsman?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pease?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes, and the motion passes 5-0. We'll move forward to 5G. Councilmember Shorsman.
Yeah, we received some public comment about this item, and so I just wanted to make sure we were clear with what was happening with the questions that we received. I don't know if there's any staff here from the Community Development Department that can talk about this, please.
Looks like Development Director Tway will be up here.
Good evening, thank you. So regarding the comments, we have received a number of comments from residents of this tract, and we appreciate their comments and concerns, and we've reviewed them today. We actually sent some engineers and inspectors out into the field and re-reviewed some of the plans, and we found that what we are seeing in the field is in compliance with the improvement plans that were approved as stated in the staff report. We understand there are concerns with some operational and maintenance issues related to, maintaining plantings that are out there and operations concerning parking signs. And these are things we are kind of consistently working on in this area, and we've worked with the developer and some of the residents already on them, and we will continue to work with these parties. A lot of these issues are on private areas, so private streets or privately owned parcels, and there tend to be issues between the HOA or residents and the developer. And we will continue to ensure that we are gaining compliance between fire codes, HOA needs, and project conditions. And we also have warranty bonds in place for things like landscaping. So for a year after we take this action, we have money set aside in a bond to ensure that the landscaping is properly maintained for that time. It's our opinion, the Public Works Director and I have gone back and forth today, just making sure we've gotten everything buttoned up, that we have, the issues raised today do not impact our recommendation to move forward with the acceptance, because these are maintenance and operational issues. The things that have been built are built to plan, and we continue to recommend that you adopt the resolution, and we will continue to work with the neighbors and the developer to make sure that some of these smaller issues are worked through.
So just to clarify, so the items that you were talking about, maintenance, landscaping, weed abatement, those are not part of the development agreement. The parts of the development agreement that we would be concerned about have been completed the way they were supposed to, and these are separate issues.
They're not part of the public improvement plan, so those generally are things that are constructed per the, so walkways, roadways, there is landscaping plans. Our inspectors went out and said that it's in compliance. Sometimes when landscaping is first installed, it doesn't look its greatest, but we will continue to monitor it over the next year. I don't know if Matt Horn has anything else to add or if that's good, but we have reviewed everything and inspected to make sure that what is built is per plan. And we will follow up on the issue that was raised about the fire lanes and the signage and just make sure that those are installed per requirements of the plans and HOA regulations and the fire code.
Thank you very much for clarifying all that. I didn't want to move forward with something if we were not all the way there yet. Thank you.
Thank you, great questions. Are we okay with bringing 5K along with this conversation? Do you want those separate? Okay, so let's go ahead and do public comment. Do you have any people?
Yes, we
Great,
have 4
thank you.
speakers on this item. The first is Addie Barkley, then Barbara Thompson, and then Daniel Thompson and Gail Riff.
Good evening, and thank you for seeing me today. I approach you today because although we have an affirmation that everything has been complete, I beg to differ. I approach you because we have the authority, you have the authority and the responsibility to ensure that the builder meets his obligations, which have not been met. I see the draft of acceptance is on file and you're ready to proceed. And I hope that hearing our concerns today is more than just process. We've heard your concerns. I've experienced with the builder, although we have promises of continued assistance, during the last rainy season, whereas I approached the city representative and said, here are the issues with drainage, they referred me to the builder who said, the city signed off on them, thank you very much. And so I anticipate that that will be the same thing, same position that the builder will take at this point in time. An item on today's agenda of approval was the landscape, and I'm not speaking specifically about the aesthetics, I'm speaking more about the erosion in the streamways that were designed to go through our community. At one time, the builder was approached with improvements recommended, and they did do some erosion control, which in turn developed some more slippery slopes, and however didn't prevent the erosion, but it did build bridges and some gullies, which allows, and some stream gullies, which allows persons and infants to climb upon, underestimating their potential for injury in those areas. And incidentally, these areas are within 25 or so feet to the recently constructed community of affordable houses that sit within our development, and about 25 feet away from their recreational area. An issue really with those areas is a matter of the city and the builder's responsibility to ensure the safety of both communities in the designs of the streams and the drainages. As the current design is incomplete, improvements do not preserve the area and jeopardize the safety of the adjacent properties and the safety of the families that live in those communities. This preservation and safety can only be addressed by disapproving the acceptance of Phase 3 and requiring that the landscape and the erosion in the drains, in those streamways, are addressed aesthetically, the planting, but most importantly for the reasons of safety to the persons and the property of the people who live in both those communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as our city clerk calls your name, if you could have the next person get behind the first speaker, please.
Barbara Thompson, and then Daniel Thompson, and then Gail Riff.
Hi, good evening, Council. Thank you for having us this evening. I'm Barbara Thompson. I am currently a Board of Director on the Toscano HOA, and there are definitely some issues that it was not built to plan. When you look at the landscaping plans, the irrigation plans, they don't match with what is in our community. I will start with the recycled water line in phase 3. That is just missing. That was missing. And so this came to my awareness in June or July. I have had emails go back and forth to the city, and the last email after sending them, repeatedly for weeks to inquire about why this water line was just not built out, I just stopped hearing from people at the city. August 12th is the last email that indicates that there were conditions of approval that called out for this line, that it needed to be built, and it was not. No one at the city has been able to explain to me why or how this happened and how things got signed off and keeping moving forward. That is one of the main things. Drains and ongoing issues, as Addie mentioned, there's erosion. There are issues with our pathways collapsing, which are causing danger. Individuals who are walking up the pathways from phase 2 and 3, they're sliding. I mean, they're starting to give out. So there's a concern with that. In regard to the water, back to that, we've had continuous water leaks that tend to happen. The most recent one occurred in July or August. We're not quite sure exactly when it started, but we noticed an increase in the water. So that has been addressed, but that was also phase 3. I mention it because it's a concern if things are getting signed off and we're being told by people at the city that things have been done. They're not being done because there are things that we can visually see that are not. So where's that trust? How do we really know that the boxes are indeed getting checked? The weed abatement and aesthetic stuff, of course, that is an issue. However, when you think about missing water lines and drainage issues and erosion issues, I can see where the aesthetic side of it is maybe falls to the wayside a little bit. However, I do want to mention it because in the landscape plans that were specifically called out in a specific area, for example, Lot 85 in our community, those plantings are few and far between. It was nowhere near planted. Having conversed with our landscaper, he has indicated that we have about maybe 50% of the plantings in phase 3. So I largely disagree with the city stating that these things have been built out as they should have been. And I ask that you look into this further and help hold the city of SLO accountable for holding developers coming into our city accountable. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you, council members, mayor. I'm Daniel Thompson. I come to you today to speak about outcomes, and when the city goes in to build projects like this, we can say what's on paper and what's in the community, but what we really care about is equitable outcomes. And I think here we are commemorating Arbor Day, and it's not enough to just have a developer who comes and lays trees on the ground for a week and then plants them in soil that has had a 50% failure rate. So, if we're going to inspect, the community and talk about plantings, we should really have outcomes in mind. Additionally, we're here today to discuss this, and as Barbara said, we have pavers that have settled. I did a quick lap on the Arezzo block before I came here, counted no more than 10 cracks in the sidewalk. I mean, we haven't even made it into a reasonable failure period yet, and all of that cost is either going to fall on the individual homeowners, the HOA, or the city itself. Additionally, there's been no outreach or engagement with the developer, with the HOA, none at all, to sort of clear these issues with the community. And again, I think in any sort of equitable, outcome-oriented organization, we look at the constituents and we take their input to ensure that everybody's getting what they want out of these developers, and not just the developer's ability to make a profit. Another example that I'd like to raise, professionally speaking, I lead codes and standards for a company, Schneider Electric, that was named last year as the most sustainable company on the planet by Time Magazine. Not my words, theirs. I feel that strongly that the National Electric Code has provisions for solar-ready homes, and access to the plans that we have are denied through a non-disclosure element of the developer. So as you guys move forward and you look at other developments in the city, it's important to promote policies that promote transparency. So it's not about, oh, do we have a chase for wire from the garage to the roof to be able to put that conductor in the future? I can't move forward with my solar project because the developer has denied me access to the truss plant. So, how do I know where to anchor those panels at? It becomes guesswork. And I'd like to close, with an issue of enforcement. So every plan that is across the street in the planning department calls out 3-inch pipe, all draining that comes off 4-inch pipe. And every single pipe that's out there is 3 inches. That was a signed off. That's part of a legal process, but the outcome is, just think about how flow is calculated. It's cross-sectional of an area. You go from 4 to 3 and it greatly diminishes our throughput. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Gail Rife here. Some of the approved subdivision plans have overlooked private improvements required by the conditions in Resolution 10514. Apparently, the city lacks the authority to retroactively revise these approved plans, even to satisfy deficient city codes. Thus, it appears the HOA could later be liable for these deficiencies through no fault of its own. Regardless of liability, my comments concern enforcing the no parking requirements on the private streets with the planned development PD overlay zone of this project with proper code street signage. Specifically, the PD identifies the use of garage parking from the Margarita Area Specific Plan Mass Resolution 9615, the required conditions for no parking on these private streets under Resolution 10514, and no parking city codes to enforce the conditions. Today, none of the fire line signs posted in this development on private streets in excess of 150 feet meet city code and thus cannot be enforced by the police department. For the smaller streets, the current signs do not meet the Resolution 10514. Condition 67C, no parking except in approved designated spaces, and 67D, grant to the city the right to tow away vehicles on a complaint basis which are parked in unauthorized spaces. However, the City Code 1036-100 entitles parking prohibited on narrow streets, authorizes no parking signs on any street where the width doesn't exceed 20 feet. The development has 43 approved designated guest spaces. Spaces within the PD per the approved private street plan, and each owner has 2 off-street garage parking spaces per the mass, in which the majority of dwelling units in the PD do not have driveways. In a recent open board meeting, new rules were introduced converting portions of the private street ends into parking spaces without any consideration that it violates the conditions of no parking city code on narrow streets and impedes owners from backing out of their garages safely. Without going into the history, this was already looked at this city several times, several years ago, and is not an option. Proper city codage signage to meet private street conditions would put a stop to this. Older residents like me are in a minority in this development. We don't want any potential liability for allowing illegally parked vehicles on these streets. We also want our neighborhood to look nice, nor do we want to feel intimidated by those who appear to disregard city parking codes and aesthetics. Honorable Mayor Stewart and City Council, is it possible the city manager could coordinate with the appropriate city departments to put in place the right signage to meet parking code restrictions once and for all? And in most cases, we are merely talking about replacing current signs with correct ones. And finally, I sincerely wish to thank city staff for all their efforts on this project, and you, City Council, too. I know you've heard from me in the past. I'm nobody new. And I really want to thank the staff back here for everything they've done to help me in the past, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have one more?
That was our final speaker.
Okay. Thank you, Director Tway.
Thank you again. So some of these issues are new. We had not heard about the erosion or the potential safety issues, so I'm going to revise my earlier statement and say that these aren't necessarily all maintenance and operational. So at this point, in order to give us time to go back out and look at those specific issues that have been addressed, and I can reach out to some of the speakers that have been here to see if there's, if we're going to go out, we should go out and look at everything. So see if there's anything else we should look at, but I would recommend continuing this item.
Thank you. I agree. I was going to suggest the same thing. There's too many things that were very concerning to me. So thank you very much. Do we have to pick a specific date, City Attorney?
You don't. You can continue to a date uncertain, and I think that's probably best advised, given that we don't know the scope of the inspection that'll be necessary or when we'll be able to complete that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, we will table this to a date uncertain, and I really thank all of the community members who came out to share the information. This is the kind of detail that we need to be able to know the next step, so greatly appreciate you. And, oh, sorry, City Attorney?
Yes, Madam Mayor, if we could get a motion for the continuance, please.
Thank you. Good point. Councilmember Francis?
Yeah, and I also wanted to thank all the speakers for bringing all these specific details to us, and thank Director Tway for being so responsive to the speakers that came up today. And now we'll move to continue item 5G to a date uncertain.
Perfect, thank you. And Councilmember Shoresman, I just want to thank you for bringing all of this up as well, and calling on you next.
Yes, thank you to the community members who added some additional context to this, and second the motion to continue the item to a date uncertain.
Wonderful. City Clerk, can we have roll call?
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Shoresman?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pease?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes, so the motion passes 5-0. 5G will be tabled or continued to a date uncertain. And yes, I also echo Councilmember Shoresman. Thank you so much. I know she has stepped out of the room, but Director Tway for responding so quickly. And I believe I saw Director Horn as well. So thank you very much. Yeah, I saw that. Okay, so we'll move back to or forward to 5K. Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you so much. I want to check with my colleagues and staff about a minor revision. This item has us having a council meeting on December 10th that would consist of the new council post-election, and a meeting on December 3rd that would be swearing in the new council and my departure, as I'll be termed out and not a part of this. So, but December 3rd is a little tentative because the election needs to be certified, and it's not always ready in that time period. I have SLOCOG would meet on December 4th. And so because December 3rd is kind of tentative anyway, I was hoping to have the swearing in of the new council occur after December 4th. So depending on, I know there were some travel arrangements. I checked with staff. They sounded okay with going all the way to December 9th. So that would be a Monday. So I don't know if everybody's availability. I would also be okay with the 4th, but I think you already travel on that evening. So if it's possible, if it's not, if that conflicts with other people's schedules, I understand. But I thought if I could get one.
And before we go further in this conversation, City Clerk, I know that we have specific deadlines or dates in our charter. Do we have to complete this swearing in and transition before December 9th, or would that date be okay?
At this point, it would be okay because our charter says December 1st, and we cannot meet that by any chance because of the dates of between the election and the December 1st. So that would reasonably could be the soonest we could do it.
Okay, thank you so much. Just want to make sure we're not violating anything before we move forward. Councilmember Shoresman.
Yeah, my question, I guess, to the city manager probably, and maybe the clerk too, is there an intention, whether the meeting was on the 3rd, the 9th, or the 10th, for the content of that meeting to be anything other? Will there be business items, or will it be just the farewell to Vice Mayor Pease and swearing in of new council members?
City manager.
Thank you. So the intent of that first meeting of December is really to swear in the new and seat the new council and celebrate the service of council members who will be leaving us as well. And so we do not have an intent to have any business items on that one. However, December 10th is going to be a big agenda. So we're putting people to work immediately.
So.
As per every year.
Exactly.
Okay, so further clarification, I thought, okay, so we would do the swearing in on the 9th and then a full meeting on the 10th?
Correct.
Oh, okay. I was thinking we were still just swapping one for the other. Okay, thank you.
As far as myself, you're correct. I will be heading out for a statewide board meeting with the city attorney on the 4th. We'll be returning on the 6th. And due to it being very far north, I don't think I could get back in time for the 6th unless we did a swearing in 5 minutes before the holiday parade. So I think it would be good to do it on Monday the 9th. That would be okay with me personally. Councilmember Shoresman?
I'm going to be honest, I don't have access to my other calendars at the moment. So I wonder if we could kind of table this until, maybe, know this is under discussion and then make a final decision at our next meeting, or would that be too late?
I don't think it's too late. And as the staff report's written, it could be any time between moving it. The staff report actually says that there's a potential anytime from the 4th to the 9th. So if you just agree to sometime between there, we accomplish that.
Okay. I'm okay with giving us a window there, but I would ask your grace in letting me check my other calendars before we make a decision right here tonight on the actual date.
Absolutely, and I think we can either table it to the end of the meeting and be able to check our calendars on break, or we can table it to our next meeting. Either way would be fine. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, I'll move to approve the window of dates as proposed in the staff report.
I do have more comments. Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Yeah, I'll second that, and for sure it couldn't be on December 6th because that is the holiday parade. So, yeah, if it turns out that the results are certified sooner, then I guess we'd have to deal with that because it's possible that they would be.
City Clerk, can you respond to that?
Yeah, however, the governor did sign a bill for this election that says if there are outstanding signature verifications, that the clerk recorder cannot certify the election any sooner than December 3rd.
Okay.
So we would we would be hoping on the fact that all the signatures came back right and perfect to get it any sooner.
Okay, all right. So thank you. Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, so we have we've not taken any public comment, so I just thought before we move to the motions, do we have any public comment on this item?
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you. So I hear a motion in a second. I also heard a request for a table. Do you want to provide an amendment for tabling? Are you okay with that moving forward?
I think if we give ourselves that window, that's fine, and then we can finalize it later.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure before we move forward. All right, can we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Councilmember Shoresman?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pease?
Yes, with appreciation. Thank you.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes, you're welcome. And I look forward to seeing whoever will be sworn in on December 9th. Thank you so much. That is very exciting stuff. All right, so now we are moving forward to the public hearing and business items. So we'll be, last meeting we discussed the TBID, the Tourism Business Improvement District Annual Report, and now we will be having an annual public hearing for the Tourism Business Improvement District. So we will have a report and a presentation, and then we'll proceed with questions. We'll have a public comment. Then the city clerk will call the name of any hoteliers in case there are any protests. And then we will close the public hearing, and we will calculate and report the results of the protest. The city clerk will report the results, And sorry, I'm going through all of these instructions, but this is a little different than our typical public hearing. Then we'll bring the council back and we'll do a discussion and action. So Deputy City Manager Greg Herman will kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Happy to be here tonight. I'll just make some brief introductions. We have a very brief presentation as well, and then we'll continue on with the process that you were able to explain to everyone. Thank you for that. So this is a follow-up item to the presentation at the last meeting on the annual report and also the calling of the process to levy the assessment. That's a process that we go through on an annual basis to collect the funds, to support the efforts through the Tourism Business Improvement District. And by way of introduction, for the presentation tonight, we have our Tourism and Community Promotions Manager, Jackie Clark Charlesworth, and Lydia Bates, who is the Director of Sales and Marketing for Hotel San Luis Obispo and our TBID Board Chair, and I'm happy to hand it over to them for the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Stewart and members of the council. As Mr. Herman mentioned, this evening we will present the report for the public hearing of the Tourism Business Improvement District. This hearing tonight is the second meeting in a two-part process for the TBID that the city conducts annually for the council to decide whether to continue the TBID. The process consists of the adoption of the annual report, which you heard last meeting, followed by the annual public hearing. Council approved this year's TBID annual report at the October 1st, 2024 meeting, like I said, 2 weeks ago. So it is required within the city's municipal code that after the approval of the TBID annual report, council adopts a resolution of intention to levy the annual assessment for that fiscal year, then schedules a public hearing to receive any written or oral protests against the continuation of the district. Tonight, we will hold such hearing with the recommendations before you and through the following actions. First, to conduct a public hearing to receive testimony regarding the City Council's intention to continue the citywide Tourism Business Improvement District, and to determine whether a legally sufficient protest is made. And finally, if no legally sufficient protest is made, Council is recommended to adopt a resolution affirming the continuation of the San Luis Obispo Tourism Business Improvement District, setting forth the basis for the assessment and levying the assessment upon hotels in the district for fiscal year 24-25. So, as a reminder on the background of the TBID celebrated its 16th anniversary on the district formation on October 1st, when we were all together here last. The TBID is funded through a self-assessment of the San Luis Obispo lodging industry of 2% of gross receipts, and the constituent base is made up of all TOT paying businesses in the city, including hotels, motels, inns, B&Bs, and permitted homestay properties. The ordinance which formed the TBID was implemented according to the state Streets and Highway Code, and it stipulates that the assessment must be used for tourism marketing to benefit the hotel operators within the district. The use of the funding is recommended by a 7-member advisory board appointed by City Council, made up of lodging business owners, operators, or managers.
Alrighty, so a little bit about TBID accomplishments for fiscal year 2023 and 2024. During the first part of this process on October 1st, we presented to the council the highlights of TBID activities from the prior fiscal year as a description of how the TBID assessment was invested over the last fiscal year. And a few of the accomplishments include being named number 5 on CNN's Travel Best Small Towns to Visit in 2024 as the town that is pure California perfection. We launched a fully redesigned new website, visitslow.com, which highlights a vast array of experiences, events, and businesses unique to SLO residents and visitors alike. Also helped people discover and rediscover San Luis Obispo. Multiple social media posts went viral, reaching hundreds of thousands of future visitors. And then we also continued the Sustainable SLO program and the Keys for Trees initiatives.
It's okay.
Oh, sorry.
There's your backside.
Second page. where 1% of TBID revenue goes back to planting trees here in SLO as part of that goal for 2035. And supported midweek travel with a robust public relations campaign promoting visiting SLO Sunday through Thursday with promotional incentives and a large ad campaign.
So following that presentation of our accomplishments and TBID's annual report for 2023-2024, on October 1st, Council adopted a resolution of intention to levy the annual TBID assessment and scheduled a public hearing to receive any written or oral protests against the district. By the start of the meeting tonight, staff has received 0 written protests. At the conclusion of the public hearing, if there are any additional protests submitted, we will tally those for the city clerk to report the results. Mayor Stewart, I will now turn it back over to you for any questions and to open up the public hearing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lydia, as well. We really greatly appreciate your time here. Do we have any questions from my colleagues? Okay, so we'll move forward. And City Clerk, will you call the names of any hoteliers? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Marks.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the city manager for filling us in on the new platform for the enforcement of the regulations for the temporary housing, like the Airbnb, because that was my question, which I won't ask now. But just that the short-term housing is actually also liable for the TOT payment. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And then do you have anybody on your board who represents that constituency?
That is correct. And no, we currently do not have anyone currently sitting on our 7-member board that represents that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilmember Marks. Sorry, I missed that. All right, so I'll go back to City Clerk, and we call the names of any hoteliers.
I have no speaker cards from any hoteliers. Are there any in the room that would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, we had none.
Okay, then we'll close the public hearing, and I will not ask you to calculate the number of protests. Bring back again. Would you like to make a motion or ask any more questions or have any more comments? Council members, Councilmember Marks.
Yes, if it's appropriate right now, I would like to move the staff recommendation that we continue the San Luis Obispo Tourism Business Improvement District, and that we adopt a draft resolution entitled "A Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Luis Obispo declaring the basis for and the levy of the assessment for the San Luis Obispo Tourism Business Improvement District and affirming the establishment of the district."
Thank you so much. And also on the slideshow, can you go back to the page that has like the bolded of what it TBID does since 1989?
Yes, to the background. This one? Mm-hmm.
Thank you, yes. I had Councilmember Francis, but I was just going to add 2 cents at the, okay. Well, as I have been talking with people recently about the TBID, one of the things that sometimes people put some feedback of, well, tourists, they take up the space of locals, they take up all of our resources. And I do really like to put this out there to remind people that this cost is to defray the cost of services that we have on an everyday basis here in our community. So I greatly appreciate that you created this slide, because I think that's really important. I know it's a basic background and we talk about it a lot, but I think just to take a moment to think about not only are we excited to have tourists and their economic input into this community, but we also see this as to offset what the locals have to deal with on a regular basis. So thank you so much. Councilmember Francis, did you want to second that motion? You have to turn the thing on.
Yes, I'd like to second that motion.
Great, thank you so much. City Clerk, can we have roll?
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Shorsman?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pease?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes, and the motion passes 5-0. Thank you so much for both of your time.
Thank you.
And thank you to the whole TBID board. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a quick break before we head into the next topic. It is 6:45. We'll meet back here at 7 o'clock. Well, thank you so much for pausing for the break. And we are back with 6B, the review of an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision to approve a conditional use permit to establish a fraternity. And with us, we have, excuse me, Director Timmy Tway to kick us off, and then moving forward to Rachel Cohen and Hannah.
Thank you so much. Good evening once again. The item before you tonight is specifically about a site on Foothill and a requested conditional use permit that was approved by the Planning Commission and has since been appealed. Thank you for letting me tee up this conversation for staff. I want to recognize that there are a number of issues related to fraternity uses in the community that are impacting community and neighborhoods, and we are working to address all of these issues. It's a fairly significant lift. And I wanted to just ensure that everyone here kind of understood the scope of this item here in particular, which is about this specific request at this address. And so as Hannah goes through her presentation, it's really tailored to this issue, but we do recognize that there are larger issues at play, and we are happy to address those, either through questions or through future memos or correspondence if you wish. So with that, I will hand it over to our wonderful planning team, who will present this item for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Hannah, sorry I said Hannah, apologize.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Hannah Hahn, and I'll be presenting on the second hearing item for tonight. This is the appeal of the Planning Commission's approval of a conditional use permit for a fraternity located at East Foothill and Monte Vista Place. The request is for a conditional use permit to establish a fraternity for up to 24 members on a property at East Foothill and Monte Vista. There are a total of 6 units on the property, addressed as 1264 and 1264.5 East Foothill, as well as 1241, 1243, 1249, and 1251 Monte Vista. As a part of this application, the fraternity would also be making minor site improvements to revise the parking configuration on site for consistency with current city standards for parking and driveways, along with establishing tandem parking on the west driveway. Provided here is a vicinity map of the project site. The developed property contains 4 separate residential buildings located on the through lot that has access from both East Foothill and Monte Vista. As shown, the site is located in R4 zone. Is surrounded by other high-density uses, such as other fraternities, sororities, multifamily residences, and is located within a quarter mile of Cal Poly campus, which is to the immediate north. Provided here is a site plan showing all 4 residential buildings outlined in red, including the revised parking configuration for the site. To the right of the screen is access via East Foothill, and to the left of the screen is access via Monte Vista. On June 12, 2024, the Planning Commission had reviewed the CUP and voted 5-0 to approve the permit, subject to the required findings and additional conditions. This approval included standard conditions as identified in the zoning regulations, which limit the number of permitted residents. They regulate the number of attendees for routine meetings and gatherings, require affiliation and good standing with the university, and establish a responsible contact for the fraternity. In addition, there is a standard use permit condition that would require re-review with the Planning Commission if there is a violation of either the conditions of approval or city ordinances and regulations. In response to concerns raised in public comment for that hearing, the Planning Commission's approval also included additional conditions identified as 14 through 16. Condition 14 was written to require an extended range of quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 9 p.m. instead of only 10 through 7 as required by the municipal code. This is required for regular compliance with a lower exterior noise limit. If the fraternity wishes to deviate from this requirement, then prior approval of a special use permit, special event permit by the director would be required. Condition 15 was included to establish and require ongoing communication between the fraternity and its neighbors in the vicinity, as there were concerns related to notification of special events. And lastly, condition 16 was included to clearly identify that approval of a special event is required prior to any amplified noise generating activities. After the Planning Commission hearing, the appellant submitted a timely appeal of the approval. The appellant does not concur with findings 5 and 6 as it relates to the health, safety, and general welfare of those living and working in the vicinity, as well as compatibility of the fraternity with uses in its surroundings. The appellant is supportive of the use permit, but requests that conditions be added and or revised in order to better meet any compatibility concerns. 7 issues related to large gatherings, noise, and ongoing enforcement were identified in the appeal statement. These issues are summarized along with staff's responses in the following slides. The first issue is regarding consistency of the CUP with prior CUP approvals for fraternities. The appellant states that more restrictive conditions found in these older CUPs should also be applied to this application. Staff has noted that the older approvals are from the 1980s through the early 2010s. Since the approval of these older applications, there have been codified improvements to Title IX that would protect the public peace and welfare regardless of any use permit approval. In addition, the comprehensive update to Title 17 in 2018 had established standard conditions for fraternities and sororities. Therefore, these code requirements and updated standard conditions for fraternities are taken into consideration as part of our review of this more recent CUP application. In addition, staff has also found that there is imprecise language in past conditions that can and should be improved in order to be consistent with municipal code limitations and any constitutional requirements. As such, these code changes and improvements to language are reflected in staff's responses in the following appeal issues. For the second issue, the appellant states that the approval of a special event permit does not allow exceptions from the noise ordinance. To clarify, there is a section in the noise ordinance that allows for an exception process. Any approval would need to meet the required findings to ensure that there would not be adverse impacts to the public health, safety, and welfare of those in the vicinity. Staff would like to note that a noise exception has not been previously approved for other projects. In response to public correspondence received on noise concerns, and if the council wishes to restrict the types of activities that fraternities may have that may result in significant noise, you can direct staff to revise relevant conditions to state that noise exceptions would not be approved as part of any special event permit. And for the third issue, the appellant is requesting that condition 14 be revised to limit the number of people to only residents between 10 p.m. and 9 p.m. Staff would like to note that there are constitutional concerns with placing limitations on the type of people in private residences. As such, during the Planning Commission hearing, condition 14 was written to more directly address noise concerns by identifying an extended range of quiet hours between 10 and 9 p.m. In addition, I also wanted to highlight that there are applicable regulations throughout our municipal code that would address noise, any unruly gatherings, and I also wanted to highlight that the city is designated as a safety enhancement zone during specific times of the year where there would be increased fines if, let's say, there were violations to any of those specific code sections. And so staff does find that this concern would be addressed through condition 14 as written, as well as those additional code requirements. And then regarding the next issue is the re-review of conditional use permit. The appellant is requesting either an additional or a revision to a condition that will require re-review once a certain number of violations is received within a specified time frame, similar to older approvals. As written, condition 3 does not establish a threshold. This allows for staff to refer any re-reviews upon receipt of any substantiated violation or frequency of violations. Therefore, this would be more restrictive than what is requested by the appellant. Staff is recommending a minor revision to condition 3 at the very end of that condition. We're recommending an additional sentence that states a re-review by the Planning Commission shall be accompanied by the appropriate fee. This is intended to encourage fraternities not to have any violations for their CUPs. The next issue is regarding written complaints. The appellant is requesting a revision to condition 3 to not require written complaints in order for reporting parties to remain anonymous. Staff recommends that complaints still be in written format, as that would provide and document critical information for any sort of violation. We would also like to clarify that any re-reviews initiated by staff is supported by substantiated violations, and the contact information of any reporting party would not be included as supporting evidence. Therefore, it's not recommended to revise the condition to not require written complaints. For the next issue is regarding the accumulation of violations. The appellant is requesting a new condition that states that violations are accumulated against the parcel instead of the individual addresses located on this property. For this CUP application, the fraternity does identify the entire site for all of their activities, and therefore it would be regulated under one use permit. Therefore, any violations of those conditions would be considered against the identified premises, which includes all addresses in this case. Therefore, staff finds that this concern would be addressed through the scope of the application. And lastly, the last appeal issue requests that a condition be included, similar to older CUP approvals, that includes this statement provided here on this slide: failure to comply with any of the above conditions or code requirements or the conduct of the use so as to constitute a violation of federal, state, or local law, or so as to constitute a public nuisance, or so as to cause adverse impacts on the health, safety, and welfare of persons in the vicinity of this use is prohibited and may constitute grounds for the revocation of this permit. In response to this, staff would like to highlight that condition 3 states that the use permit may be re-reviewed if there are any violations of the conditions. In addition, there are other municipal code regulations that state that higher review authorities such as the state and federal regulations would apply. In addition, there is a chapter in our municipal code that also does talk about grounds for revocation. And therefore, staff does find that this concern would be addressed through condition 3 as written, as well as those additional code regulations.
Thank you, Hannah. And to close us out, again, we're recommending a change to condition 3. I just want to clarify that that fee that would be charged to the fraternity or sorority, not to the party that made the complaint to the city. It basically would cover staff time. If we get a number of these, it's a lot of work to make sure we're ready to go to planning commission. So we wanted to recoup that fee. And it's also, like Hannah mentioned, another disincentive to be violating your conditional use permit. So at this point, per the staff report, we don't have any other recommended revisions. However, the council may provide us with direction to add and/or remove or strengthen conditions of the conditional use permit. And just a note, we have read all of the correspondence that has come in, and there's been a lot. And there are a lot of suggested changes to conditions of approval. And we have provided an agenda correspondence responding to some of them. And so we are more than happy to facilitate a discussion about amending the conditions. We have a Word document that we can pull up and we can work in real time to do that. We have some suggested language that has been developed already, considering some of the comments that we received, if that's where the council would like to go. And really our goal with conditions when we're making them is to balance clarity, effectiveness, getting at the actual issue. So if the issue is noise, let's make sure the condition actually addresses noise, and also enforceability. So, some of the comments that we've made or the response from staff is just concerns about whether or not a condition as written is actually something we could go out into the field and enforce. I think the worst thing that I see is a condition that exists that people expect to be enforced that we just don't have the ability to do because it is not written in a clear way or it's not something we can actually do. So I just wanted to frame the conversation with that. And with that, we are here. We have the Chief of Police, Code Enforcement, and myself and the City Attorney here to help answer any questions. And we are happy to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of information and go through. And this is also another unique moment as far as our business process, as far as business items. So because this is an appeal, sorry. I'm going to start with asking any of the council members if you've had any ex parte conversation. And I'll start with you, Vice Mayor Pease.
No ex parte.
Thank you, Councilmember Francis.
None.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks.
No, I have had no ex parte communication. That means no communication with either of the parties outside of this meeting about this issue.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Shorsman.
No ex parte.
Thank you. Okay, so we've gotten through that part. Now we go to the fun of questions of staff, and then we will go into the public hearing section to the public, where I will give 10 minutes to the appellant. And as a reminder, the appellant is entitled to 10 minutes of public testimony. You can also save some of your time for rebuttal, or you can choose to use it all at once. And then, excuse me, and then the applicant will get 10 minutes of public testimony as well, and will also be able to reserve time if you'd like to for rebuttal. So I will go to questions of staff. Do my council members have any questions of staff? Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the correspondence. I did have a chance to go back and listen to the Planning Commission, and there was, a lot of effort at that level to address some of these concerns. So I appreciate that as well. I think the question that I want to check in with staff to understand the options a little bit is the condition 3 and the kind of the timing and triggers of a re-review of the CUP, and wondering if there's, if we put either a time frame, it shall be reviewed within, X number of months. Also, what would it look like if there was, is it any violation? So if somebody gets a noise violation, and do you then in addition need a complaint? Would it make sense to have an annual review so that if there were any violations that it would kind of come up in front of the Planning Commission for a review and evaluation of the enforcement versus, or maybe there's also a complaint. Anyway, if you could talk a little bit more about kind of what's the management of that review process.
Absolutely. We've had many minutes and hours of discussion about this particular issue. So as written currently, and how it appears in a lot of our CUPs, is upon a written complaint, and we have this issue with a different fraternity that's moving through the system right now, but upon a written complaint, it shall go to the Planning Commission for review. There's, like you said, there's no timing for that, and it's kind of a reactionary process. We wait for a written complaint to come in, and then we act on it. Some alternatives would be something like, if you have 3 or 4 violations, so they are someone complains to code enforcement or the police, and you have violations that are violations of your conditional use permit or the zoning code, then you shall go to the Planning Commission. You could say within a year or within 2 years. You know, if you trigger a number within a certain time frame, we could put it that way. That gives us a little less flexibility. We also talked through something that is a hybrid. So either upon a written verified complaint from a member of the public, or for verified violations in a year, you shall go to the Planning Commission. That gives it the ability for someone from the public to say, there was something that happened, this isn't okay, and also a kind of proactive trigger. Having said that, you know, with one permit, that's not a lot of staff resources. If we continue to write this into multiple permits, say we have 20 CUPs, one of the things we've worked through is how do we manage that as staff? It's a little easier truly for us if it's a complaint-based system. We get a complaint, we work it through the system. If it's something like upon the 2nd or 3rd violation, we need to figure out a way that we are getting information fed to us from the police department about who got noise violations the previous night. You know, so it's kind of a constant data activity. We're not currently set up for that. And so that's where the balance is between these two options. In terms of a timeline from the receipt of the written complaint or the violation to when it goes to Planning Commission, I totally understand why that is desirable. And I will say the current one we're working on has taken a while. It's one of the first ones we've seen in 10 years plus. So we wanted to make sure that we were working through the process in the correct way. One of my concerns with that, we can do it. One of the concerns is that it can be difficult to contact property owners if it's an LLC, to get them on the phone to explain what's going on, to contact fraternity members. There's issues with summer. You know, we want to give people due process. We want to make sure that we're holding a hearing for their permit when they are here and can respond to it. So that's the only thing I would ask for you to keep in mind. Again, also, if we had 20 of these and all 20 of them violated at the same time, I mean, that's just a staff resource issue, getting people to Planning Commission within 3 or 4 months. So these things are all doable. It's just balancing the impact to staff and the ability for us to actually enforce the condition. That is my long-winded answer for you could do it, but there are kind of pros and cons to each way of addressing the trigger issue.
City Attorney?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As we're talking about Condition 3, I just want to make sure that we're focusing on the entirety of Condition 3, because I'm hearing, I've heard throughout the course of the appeal a lot of discussion about citizen complaints and concerns about a citizen needing to provide a written complaint. And I just want us to make sure that we're reading the whole context, which says written complaints from any citizen, code enforcement officer, fire department, police employee, which contains information or evidence supporting a conclusion that a violation of a use permit. So when there is a call for service to the police department that results in a police response and a validated violation resulting in a citation, as I read that condition, that is a complaint from the police department. So if there's if that's not the intent, or there's clarification necessary around that from the council, I just want to bring that to your attention as you're thinking through these issues.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, which does kind of bring up the difference between a violation and a complaint. It would strike me as two different things, that if there was a violation for whatever, that wouldn't automatically be considered a complaint and then automatically trigger a planning commission review. Is that correct? But it sounds like the complaint could come from the staff member as well.
So I think one of the challenges is truly this is kind of the first time we've waded into these waters in a way that we've received what we considered written complaint. I agree actually with the city attorney that you could read it as that is a written complaint. And this is, I think, a great example of clear language being necessary in a condition so that when you have a new director or a new code enforcement manager, it is clear what a written complaint, if we mean a violation, it says a verified, violation of any condition of this permit or anything. So I think it's clear language is absolutely necessary.
So with that in mind, kind of this macro issue, concerns about noise, particularly from fraternities, coming from different places, concerns that were brought up that aren't relevant here, but about satellite fraternities. What is the anticipated work effort in terms of the planning department enforcement, and how much is it reasonable for us to kind of focus on getting through this one, and with the understanding that in the future there'll be kind of a more robust, thought through, cohesive kind of template for a CUP?
Sure. So I think the public comments are correct that we work off of CUPs that tend to work and that have been successful. So what happens here will help inform what we do in the future. That doesn't mean we're going to stick to this as an absolute. Every property is unique. Every neighborhood is unique. There are different situations going on. But these conversations are helpful to calibrate where the community wants to be with conditions for this specific use. In terms of the larger goings on with fraternities, we are talking about this constantly and kind of tackling it in little pieces as we can. But at this point, given kind of the safe housing, the neighborhood services, the fraternity issues, the other things going on in code enforcement, we have not had the resources to holistically look at how do we wrap our arms around this issue. We've kind of handled it piecemeal. We are starting to look at that, but I would say if the council was interested in a program being developed with kind of more proactive enforcement, that would be a work program item that I would encourage you to consider, because it would take significant staff time to figure out both ongoing maintenance of these CUPs as well as how to tackle the satellite house issue. And one more thing about this specific condition is one of the challenges I think that we have to figure out with it is it says a city conditional use permit or city ordinance. So if there's a violation, a written complaint of a city ordinance, that could be your trash can is visible. And so I think that's where there's something to think through there of if we get a code enforcement complaint that a trash can was left out too long and it says you shall take them to planning commission for that, I think that's where, we have to think about, is that the intent of this code section? So.
Thank you.
Thank you. So many thoughts. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor Pease, for kicking us off here. Just kind of continuing along the same line of thoughts here. We're looking at the language around the substantiated written complaints from any citizen. I'm wondering, since you're describing some of the potential unintended consequences, if we put in any complaint would trigger or any violation would trigger a re-review, is there a reasonable number that we're kind of thinking about starting to trigger this? Obviously, we need to change the language in here so that it's clear what we're talking about, if it's code enforcement or a written complaint, but is there a reasonable number?
So when we were talking about this week, we were thinking through if it was not based on someone writing a complaint, but just you've hit a certain number of violations of any of these codes, we were working with the code enforcement team to try to meld it with the existing code enforcement process. And the number we came up with, and again, this is going to depend on who you ask, was 4 within a year, right? 4. So that gives 1, notice of violation goes out, 2, you get another notice with a fine, 3, and then upon that 3rd or that 4th, so it gives time for someone to remedy something, or if it's a trash can, we send a notice, don't do it again. But, if there's a certain number, we thought 3 or 4 kind of works with our code enforcement process already. And then if it's within a year or within 2 years, you then have that amount of time that someone can hit that threshold. That's what we were thinking, but again, I think it would depend on who you ask of what's an acceptable number.
And so based on the conversation you've been having already around this would include any type of violation. So it would be both your community member, neighbor written complaints, as well as your basic code enforcement type complaints. Excuse me.
Yes, it would also be, if they got a noise violation from PD, that is in direct conflict with their conditional use permit. So it would just be us keeping an eye on all of the things going on that property for a year.
And you mentioned there are some challenges with kind of the data collection and communication elements, right? Getting information in a timely manner from PD or fire department if there's a violation, a noise complaint, or a violation of fire code, or those types of things. It's my understanding there are currently 20 conditional use permits. Is that right?
There's about 20, yes.
Okay.
Some of them are not active.
Not as active.
Yeah.
And this might be a question for Chief Scott or Chief Tuggle, but are there processes in place where that information could sort of be pushed automatically to the Community Development Department so that when we got to the end of a year cycle, that information could kind of be collected in some sort of file around that conditional use permit, and then it would be kind of a brief review. Oh, there are X number of violations or other issues. It's lapsed for whatever reason, and it gets reviewed.
So I think there's 2 ways to go about this. This is getting complicated, but
Right.
You could do a rolling 4 times. So it just starts when you get the first one, and then within that year. We could also set it up where it's, every October when we go and do the housing inspection with the fire department, it's our trigger to say, since the last October, how many police calls, how many code enforcement violations were there, and we look back a year and we say, okay, there were 4, you got to go to Planning Commission. That's a little easier for us to handle. It's a clear date, it's a trigger point. What it doesn't provide is kind of the more immediate relief. If there's 4 events that happen in April,
11 months ago,
all the same
right.
time, it's a little stale when you get there. We can absolutely work with the fire and police department. When it's just one, so far it's just this one that would have that condition, but as we, hopefully provide more conditional use permits to provide regulations around these fraternities, we would have more. It becomes a little difficult. It would be every night, at the worst, it would be checking if the last night this particular address had a noise violation, right? And maybe we can do it every few months, but it's a little bit difficult to do that. I think we can absolutely provide information to the police department. Here are the CUP addresses, but they're out in the field and they're very busy. So
with that in mind, can you give me a little bit of perspective? Because sometimes I think we ask for things up here without really an idea of how many man hours are we asking for here, right? Like how many person hours, sorry, are we asking for in your department to be able to make something like this happen? If we had an annual review process for, I guess it would just be for this one up front, but what are we asking for from you?
Again, if it was every October or some date, at the best, a few hours to ask the police department, hey, what are your records for this address from the last year? We obviously have our code enforcement records. In a best case scenario, they had no violations and we check the box and we move on. I think worst case is they had violations, we take them to Planning Commission. That is what it is. If it's kind of a rolling 4-year, we would just have to figure out how do we feed the information from fire and police to ComDev, or does ComDev pull it once a month for this address? We would just have to figure out something that is reasonable, and I think that's probably a few more hours of work.
And just 2 more small ones here. There was mention that the contact information would not be supplied as evidence. Does that mean that the entire name would be redacted, or just the name of the complainant and their address? Would all of that information be redacted, or just their address?
I'm going to turn to John Mezapeza. I believe it's all identifying information would be redacted from the written complaining party.
Okay, so on the written complaints, none of that would be shared with the person who is receiving the complaint. And then finally, you mentioned something that it's sometimes challenging to get in contact with the LLC property owners, and that really kind of bothered me. And I know that we had as part of the conditions here that there needed to be a fraternity member who would be the contact person, but don't we also have conditions in there that require that the property owner themselves is contactable, or?
I would ask Hannah, but yes, that is how it should be. We should be able to contact someone and say, hey, you had a violation. So we, and again, it's a resource issue of just making sure. And I think as we were talking this week, we were like, we should tie it to the October inspection. Right. We're inspecting, we're out there, let's get their newest contact information. So we're piecing together how do we wrap our arms around this and make sure that we are making an enforceable conditional use permit.
So if it's not already explicitly stated in there, I do want to make sure that we have a requirement that whoever the property owner themselves is also needs to be contactable. Whether or not it's an LLC, there needs to be a person with a phone number attached to it, just to make sure we get that covered. And I think that's it for now.
Okay. Councilmember Shorsman.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you for the detailed agenda correspondence with all of the questions. I tried to insert a lot of questions that I had been seeing in the emails, and you did a really good job, and the team did a really good job of trying to tackle those. I think, to stay on item number 3 here, and I'm glad that Vice Mayor Pease asked the question about complaints versus violations, because I think that is something that really needs to be clarified. Whether or not we go with a system of a once a year or once a quarter or whatever kind of check system that we set up, or whether we go based on the occasional one-off complaints or violations. I think we need to be as consistent and clear as we can. And the other thing that really sticks up to me in this number 3 is receives substantiated written complaints. So what is a substantiated written complaint? Is that a violation? So there's just, if someone issues a complaint, if a resident issues a complaint, they're going to assume that that's a complaint. And then if our threshold is any complaint goes to the Planning Commission, then, any neighbor can say, well, I issued a complaint. How come this isn't going to the Planning Commission? So whatever we settle on, I think I think I'm restating what people have said already, but I see the confusion here, and I think it's expressed in the emails that we got as well. And so I want to make sure that we flesh that out a little bit more. And so this number 3, the way you've written it here is probably the most, it's the strictest way of handling a situation. Is that kind of a correct interpretation, rather than having a tickler system where once a year or once every 6 months you look back to see if there's been complaints? This is like a complaint comes in and then we start pursuing it right away. It's more complaint based.
If we are interpreting it the way we've talked about, which is a written complaint is a violation, then yes, it would be a violation or a written complaint that is substantiated, which for us means we look into it, and would we have issued a notice of violation? Yes, we have. That complaint is substantiated. This is very strict. A kind of 3 or 4 chances is less strict. But I think there are merits to both ways of doing things. Again, I am a little worried if it says you shall take it to Planning Commission for any violation. We will be taking people to Planning Commission for anything that is a code enforcement, a verified code enforcement complaint, which is not necessarily just noise or a party or extra people on the property.
So what I've heard, not just in the emails for this item, but in other situations, the complaint, I guess, that I called the police, and by the time the police got there, they said they couldn't hear anything. So I don't have the answer on how we address that, but would that be a complaint? Would that be an unsubstantiated complaint then? And
I think
how do we?
in our world, it would be unsubstantiated. We don't have the documentation that there was an issue that
You just have
arose.
the phone call or the written complaint.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's a challenging one. I'm not sure what the answer is, but it's something that's been on my mind. The other thing is, as you've mentioned, enforcement is challenging for some of these things. Just for example, the requirement about, in this particular instance, that they are allowed to have a maximum of 48 people on the premises for a typical event or meeting. How is that enforced? If you get a noise call and, I mean, does the officer actually go in and do a head count? How does that work?
So that's a great question. I think some of it can be inferred, right? Sometimes we talk to police after a violation, or there are photos of a party and it's obviously more than 48 people. Or, you know, I would think over time, as we work on these CUPs and refine them, we can share, again, it's the sharing of information with the police department, and there's a list of here are places that have CUPs. But again, to expect that an officer who's responding to an incident is counting people because they know there's a CUP is not necessarily realistic. And so, you know, there also could be a code enforcement complaint that, hey, they have 48 people, it's Thursday afternoon, and they're having a car wash going on, and there's 200 people in the yard. You know, that's something that maybe code enforcement could address if we had someone available at that point, but it's a very hard thing. And that's where, then again, it's the conditions that are addressing the actual issue, which is if it's noise, then we should address noise. There are some ways to address it through secondary conditions like this one, but it can be very difficult. Sometimes it's easy. We see photographs and it's clearly more than 48 people in the photograph, but.
Right. A party on St. Friday's Day might be a little easier than a regular.
Hopefully they don't have more than 48 people.
Right. Gotcha. If a resident wants to appeal a special events permit, that was another question. Is there an option for that? I know that those are granted, I believe, at the community development director's discretion, correct?
So these would be, they usually go through Parks and Rec, but this speaks specifically to community development director. I'm going to turn to Tyler Corey. They're appealable? Yes. They are appealable.
Okay. I think you already talked a little bit about, there were some questions and comments in some of the emails that this particular, I know going back to what our real purpose is tonight is this one particular conditional use permit, but there were concerns and comments in some of the emails about this being precedent setting. So I think what I heard you saying earlier is that each one is sort of considered on its own, but there are certain elements that might set a precedence for future CUPs. Is that correct?
We definitely try to work off of existing CUPs that seem to work. You know, and that's why you see some cleanup here is we have a lot of the fraternity and sorority CUPs are very old. And so when we have the chance to relook at them with a case like this where someone comes in and asks for one, we get rid of outdated language or redundant language or things that we think are not really enforceable. But we do use them as templates if we see that they are working. But we also have to refine them for the specific situations, for the requests of how big the property is, how many rooms it has, if there's special circumstances with neighboring properties. And we also, you know, are happy to take direction from council. If there's larger issues, you say, we need to work through refining conditions related to this. It's something we can think about as we move forward.
All right, I think that's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Well, a lot of my questions have already been asked. I appreciate that. I wanted to move on a bit from number 3. And I had a question about what happens if a fraternity, I'm talking about number 6 here. For the life of the organization, the fraternity shall remain affiliated and in good standing with the Interfraternity Council of Student Life and Leadership at Cal Poly. If the fraternity becomes unaffiliated or is no longer in good standing, the conditional use permit shall be revoked. So, could they still apply for special events in a situation where they're no longer affiliated with Cal Poly, but they're still there? They're still living there, all 24 of them or 48 of them or however many. And they still have the conditional use permit, but occasionally Cal Poly really puts down their foot and says, no, no fraternity, sorry, you are no longer really affiliated with Cal Poly because of your egregious behavior. So could they keep operating under that circumstance?
Hannah, can you pull up, do we have slide of condition 6?
It's on page 4 of our staff report. Number 6, yeah. So if they don't have the conditional use permit because they're no longer affiliated and in good standing with Cal Poly, they could still live there, and I assume the conditions would still apply. Well, no, then the conditional use permit would be revoked, and then you'd have basically what back in the day we used to call a commune, right? What would you call it? You know. So then what happens with their special events?
Yes, great question. So we could not grant a special event permit if it was affiliated with that fraternity, because that would be allowing them to then fall back under the definition of being a fraternity or sorority, which would not be allowed because they do not have a CUP.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
We would be enabling them to violate the code because they would be living there and throwing an affiliated event. So we would not grant that special event permit because we would be enabling them to violate the code without a CUP.
Right? Okay, does the city attorney agree?
So I think you've landed upon the difficulty with regulation that's based on association. Because if they are no longer recognized as a university fraternity, and so they're by definition just a group of guys living together, we don't have the ability to regulate who people get to live with. We cannot tell them they cannot live with people they choose, so long as they're within the occupancy limits under the building code. And in general, people can apply for event permits under the otherwise applicable rules to do so. So just like any other group of people living together. Now, are there issues that would be evaluated that would probably, I'm guessing if there were a revocation of a fraternity affiliation and a revocation of a use permit, would that certainly serve as a ground to deny an event permit for that location? Sure, it absolutely would. But could we preclude people from applying for one where we have a process for that? No, we can deny an application. We can deny a request based on findings that this property's been a problem property and the city allowing exceptions to our rules to facilitate an event, regardless of who the attendees are and what their associations are, is ill-advised and not going to be something that the director's going to exercise her discretion to do. But I think, again, this conversation highlights exactly the difficulty here with this kind of associational regulation versus regulation that focuses really keenly on conduct.
Yeah, so my colleague here has said that would this fall back on, I'm going to ask your question, would this fall back on the party registration process then at that point?
I would have to see if the chief of police can enlighten. I mean, I don't know as much about the party registration process as he does. So I'm going to ask him for a little help with that question.
Thank you, members of council, for the question. If I heard you correctly, the question is, will it default back to the party registration process that the department has? And that process is purely voluntary. So anybody is welcome to have a party. They can register or not register. The value in registering is notifying the department. If there's an issue where the noise gets too loud, we'll make a courtesy call to have them quiet it down before we respond. If you don't register, all bets are off. First response could yield a hefty citation. So that's the value in the registration program. What we're talking about could also fall under unruly gatherings, depending on what kind of event it is, and that in and of itself is a whole different level of enforcement, which requires also hefty citations.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I had another question about number 5, paragraph number 5, and specifically the transportation management plan. I don't know exactly what that would involve, but I would hope that it would specify arrival and departure times of guests so that we would stay within the occupancy quota. Do you know what a management transportation?
Isn't that in relation to parking?
I don't know. I don't know what it is. Yeah.
I will ask anyone on planning if they've seen one of these in recent past. I have not, but we could absolutely require that it talks about when, sometimes it's buses that come or shuttles or parking or a valet parking plan. So we could ask that that include specification for timing.
Okay.
Great job, Tyler.
So my concern there is that if you did have several hundred people, something like that, and you had a transportation plan that specified when they were coming, how they were coming, and when they were going, the guests, and how they were going, that would in some way give the city and the neighbors some assurance that they're not just going to occupy. Okay, that's all the questions I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to question 3 or item 3. So can you pull that back up? Because I just want to make sure. So I guess we could go on and on about violation or substantiated complaint, et cetera, but why not just do annual? Because the amount of complaints that are not necessarily substantiated was potentially experienced by people in that community, but then didn't actually get caught when the police was going by or SNAP was going by. So I just feel like we have this gap where we're trying to solve for something, but yet we are solving by a factor that consistently is a problem in all of our neighborhoods near Cal Poly. So I'm trying to understand that a little bit more.
Sure. I don't think that annual is a bad idea. I think, if we are going to, again, I would ask that it's tied to a month or something so that we can just look back. But I would say that the word substantiated is pretty important, right? So it was a violation that did occur. If without that word, we have the potential for, someone to write, hey, they were really loud last night. I'm writing to the community development director, they were really loud last night. And that can be, subjective. We don't know. And so the ability to have an actual violation that occurred, I think is pretty important. Otherwise, it gets a very gray area.
I hear you, and I understand that reason. that people are not just randomly calling on people they don't like. But I also hear many a time that there has been a complaint because there has been loud noise. We have seen things that have said loud noise, but by the time the police drove by, there was not loud noise. So I feel like we have this problem from both ends. So that's where I was thinking that the annual review, I couldn't understand why that wouldn't be just thought of as an idea.
I'm sorry, I think I'm misunderstanding. So just annual review, that everything, it goes back to Planning Commission no matter what every year.
I don't know, we might have some sort of smaller version of that, almost like a checklist that is not a full review from Planning Commission, but I'm just trying to understand how do we make this work?
I
It doesn't make
understand.
sense.
I'm sorry, I was misunderstanding the question. So there are some cities that do director level annual reviews of conditional use permit, and it's the time the director looks at them on a certain, at a certain time and says, but there is some discretion there, right? Then you're getting away from this hard and fast trigger point to a discretion where the director says, what has happened over the past year in this neighborhood? We got 15 emails about it, hey, I think that's worth looking at. But again, there's discretion. And so that's the trade-off there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Also, can you explain a little bit more around the noise ordinance from 7 to 9? Because I'm imagining if someone is out partying till 2 in the morning, they don't mind sleeping until 9. So what was the reasoning for that?
I'm going to hand this one over to Hannah since she was at the Planning Commission where they discussed this particular item.
Thank you.
If I recall correctly, that condition had an extended range of hours for a lower noise limit because I think there was quite a bit of concern about any disturbances just extending into earlier hours of the morning. And so having that additional extension would really just highlight to, any attendees that they would need a wrap up.
Okay. Did you have an addition to that? Yeah, go ahead, Vice Mayor. Hold on.
Sorry, only to add that it sounded like the other conditions of approval also have that, so they were looking for alignment.
Thank you.
I don't know the actual reason
Okay.
in the first place, assuming that it's tied to a St. Patrick's Day early type of thing.
Right, and they have
is
different-
my guess, but I don't think they talked about the why.
Okay, thank you. Because, yeah, there's different safety enhancement zones for that, so it just didn't really make a lot of sense. And then if there was a revocation of the CUP, does that go back to Cal Poly and have any sort of teeth whatsoever, or is that just our revocation?
So the CUP is a city document and requirement, but we would notify Cal Poly. I mean, we try to have a open kind of line of communication about these types of things, and if something like that were happening, we would provide it to them. I'm not sure if there's anything in the conditional use permit that would require that. We could add that language so that it's a given. But, my intent would be to notify Cal Poly so they knew that that is no longer a site where a fraternity was allowed and there was behavior that led to the revocation of a conditional use permit.
Thank you. I'll leave that at my questions for now. Councilmember Francis?
Yeah, thank you. Just one more quick follow-up. A substantial number of the concerns that we got really surrounded the idea of these special event permits coming in. And I thought it might be worthwhile just to revisit, what is the scope of what additional activities are allowable under a special events permit? Like, what are we allowing when those come in? And is it just completely subjective to what's being applied for? Or do we have restrictions or confines to what's allowed?
Mr. Corey addresses a lot of them, so we'll have him come up. Currently there are specific conditions as it's written that say if you want amplified music, you need special event permit. If you want to wake up at 7 in the morning and do something, that's a special event permit. But if you could speak to kind of generally what we see and what we approve in those.
Sure, Mayor, members of the council. In terms of special events, there's a pretty wide range of what we can see. As an example, Madonna Meadows has different activities out there, concerts and car shows, and so those are special events. And we look at those. We look at kind of noise associated with live entertainment out there as an example, and would place either hours or just reminders about our noise ordinance and making sure that's monitored in real time on site. I would say that a special event for a sorority or fraternity, I can't recall the last time we've actually reviewed and approved one. It's been feels like at least 10 years. But those can range from different events like a breakfast for a fundraiser, or a variety of those types of activities versus like I don't recall us ever saying you're going to have a party, so let's do that. It's usually associated with some kind of philanthropic event.
Do we differentiate between the types of special events that we would review for a residential area versus, like you mentioned, Madonna Meadows or an event space?
Absolutely. So everything's kind of site-specific, case by case. What's the activity? What's around it? What are the potential impacts to the community, the neighborhood? Transportation, I know that's been brought up. So how's access going to be handled? What's the number of attendees that we're anticipating? And so we review all of those factors to make sure that there's appropriate conditions and requirements applied to that permit to ensure the compatibility and compliance is there with the community and neighborhood.
I thought that was interesting, your earlier point that you made, that it's been probably 10 years since a residential or a fraternity or sorority in a residential area has applied for a special events permit. Did I hear you right?
You did hear me right. I honestly don't recall the last time I've seen one.
Okay.
I know we have done them from time to time, but they were mainly associated with a fundraiser.
And that's not to say there won't be more in the future, but that just hasn't been a substantial part of what we've been seeing. No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shorsman.
She just asked my question. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I think that is all the questions at this time. I'd like to open the public hearing. So we'll give 10 minutes, the appellant. And I know we already shared it, but I'll just make sure that if you want to save time for rebuttal, that you save time. And I know there's a video to
Yep,
be
we
set up.
prepared a 7-minute video, so we're reserving the last 3 minutes for rebuttal.
This appeal is asking to add conditions that address concerns made to the Planning Commission, which, because of 1, not understanding that sororities and fraternities operate differently, and 2, not being aware that SLO PD attributes violations to a property address and not the property's APN, so fines for noise citations do not accumulate against the same parcel. The municipal code requires adequate support facilities for the intensity of use and ensuring the use is not detrimental to the neighborhood due to excessive noise. It is intended to promote the quality of life in the residential neighborhoods. There are 19 fraternities at Cal Poly and only 6 have conditional use permits. This CUP will likely serve as a template for the future, so conditions are important to mitigate noise, especially at night, and hold the fraternity responsible to abide by those conditions. The fraternity is in an area that's becoming an informal Greek row next to an R1 single-family neighborhood. As more fraternities move in, there will be an even greater impact on the neighborhood, and the CUP needs to have thoughtful conditions to promote the quality of life for everyone who lives there. The current conditional use permit is based on 2 sororities and is inconsistent with other CUPs for fraternities and also with the previous CUP for the fraternity at 1264 Foothill. Fraternities have a much greater impact on the neighborhood because they host parties with alcohol and sororities do not. Sororities go to the fraternity houses to party. That's where the noise is. For a real-life example, let's look at the sorority Kappa Kappa Gamma. It posted its events for the academic year, and each was held at either a fraternity house or a third-party venue. We can cross-reference the addresses listed in the fraternity reports, and it shows Kappa Kappa Gamma going to parties at various fraternity houses in San Luis Obispo. During the last academic year, fraternities with CUPs had 28 times more noise complaints than sororities with CUPs. The 6 fraternity locations had 37 complaints, whereas 9 sororities had only 2 complaints. The municipal code prohibits any noise which disturbs the peace and quiet of any neighborhood or which causes discomfort or annoyance to a reasonable person. It also prohibits the issuance of a permit for any activity that may violate this section. In response, staff pointed out that it's possible to get an exception that allows people to violate the noise ordinance, and the exception is subject to limitations that protect the public from the noise. The applicant or fraternity is required to demonstrate that bringing the amplified noise generating events or parties into compliance with the law would constitute an unreasonable hardship on them. The unreasonable hardship must be balanced against adverse impacts on people affected by the noisy event or any other impacts on the neighborhood. If the fraternity is able to prove that the unreasonable hardship outweighs the health, safety, and welfare of people affected by their noisy event, we turn to Chapter 17 of the Municipal Code. Section 1786260 says that the director can issue a special event permit, but only if the activities proposed by the fraternity have zero potential to detrimentally affect other people who live and work nearby. Noise from fraternity amplified events with lots of people, especially outdoors at night, has the potential to detrimentally affect other people nearby. It's also required that the event with amplified noise is consistent with or an improvement to the character of the residential neighborhood or residential zone. The appeal asks that a condition be added that limits occupancy from 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. to the specified limitation in Condition 4, which is 24 people. This condition is consistent with other fraternity CUPs and mitigates the potential for noise at night. The Planning Commission suggested a threshold of 4 violations in 12 months to trigger a CUP review. Staff said the condition was already included in Condition 3. However, Condition 3 requires a written complaint by a resident or city staff and does not set a threshold to trigger review. City staff has never filed a written complaint, even though most fraternity CUPs have multiple violations. Also, 2 written complaints were filed by residents in the last academic year for violations of a fraternity CUP, but as of yet, there has been no Planning Commission review scheduled. A threshold of violations to trigger review should be added to Condition 3. The appeal requests a condition that all noise citations at any address on the property be attributed to Lambda Chi Alpha at 1264 Foothill. The Planning Commission also suggested this condition. The fines for noise citations issued to each address should be cumulative against the property rather than separate, which holds the fraternity accountable for noise generated at the property. The appeal asks for a condition that is included in other fraternity CUPs that cites compliance with federal, state, and local laws. It's important to include this condition because it makes the condition clear rather than implied when it is written in the document. That way, the fraternity and the community understand that it's a condition of its use. At the Planning Commission hearing, the fraternity representative was asked if the fraternity hosts events at satellite houses, and he said they do not. But over the past year, Lambda Chi Alpha has hosted many events at their satellite houses and continue to do so this academic year. Despite receiving notices of violation for unpermitted fraternities at 12 Hathaway and 171 Orange, Lambda Chi Alpha hosted rush events at those addresses just this month. Since the Planning Commission hearing, there have been more noise complaints to 1264 Foothill, and the fraternity has received 2 more noise citations. This emphasizes the reason the CUP must spell out meaningful conditions to mitigate the impact of a fraternity on the neighborhood, so they understand their responsibility, and it also holds them accountable for violations. The findings say the project will not be detrimental because conditions place limits on the number of persons allowed on site, restrict activities, and limit potential disturbances. The appeal asks that conditions be added to the CUP to bear out the findings in the resolution. Special event permits can only be issued if the activity has no potential to detrimentally affect neighbors and other required findings that are not possible with large amplified events in a residential neighborhood. The conditions requested don't mean that Lambda Chi Alpha is not allowed to and cannot host large parties, just that such gatherings would be held at third-party venues. Thank you for considering this appeal for additional conditions in the CUP which make the fraternity use consistent with the required findings.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we'll move forward to the applicant, if you'd like to share in your 10 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much, City Council. It's good to be here. I appreciate it. My name's Thomas Seimer. I'm a fourth-year civil engineering major at Cal Poly. And yeah, I just want to share a little bit about why we initially applied, why I'm still very passionate about the conditional use permit, and why I think the stated and approved by the Planning Commission conditional use permit, why it's adequate. As we've talked about tonight, I think everything that's already stated in the conditional use permit is fair and almost uses us as a example for the rest of the conditional use permits that already exist and may follow. I think what is stated already in the conditional use permit is how it should be stated, and to be honest, I feel a little bit like we're being targeted in a sense. I know it's just the timing of what's going on here. The timing in which we apply is also a time in which, you know, now problems are being brought to your guys' attention with other use permits. So I share frustration with that, but that's neither here nor there. I would like to share a little bit about the good that Lambda Chi Alpha does for this community. Last school year, we raised over $10,000 for local charities such as Slow Food Bank and national charities such as Feeding America. Also, cumulatively across all of our membership, we did more than 500 hours of community service for the local communities. I would like to share that, yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you guys' time. Again, I want to put a face to the name. I think we're trying to do the right thing here. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on in these neighborhoods that completely gets swept under the rug because it's done underground. We're trying to be above ground, forthcoming, and come to you guys with the purest intentions and hopefully win your trust and do the right thing. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Yes, you can. Councilmember Marks.
Yeah, I have a question for, what was your name again?
Thomas.
Thomas.
Hi. Well, I appreciate you standing up for your fraternity and being so articulate, and it's a lot of pressure, so I appreciate that. But I wonder if you are granted this conditional use permit, if you personally and the officers of your fraternity would take responsibility to make sure that you abide by the conditions of this permit. If the city trusts you enough to do that, would you be willing to stand up and do the right thing as a fraternity?
100%, absolutely. And I believe that's why the conditional use permit was already previously approved by the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I actually do have one more question for you. Sorry. I forgot about this. This is actually for you versus Director Tway. So when we talk about the 48 people, and I think about meetings that are not necessarily a party per se, just a meeting, are those all done on campus, or do you have any of your weekly general meetings?
Yeah, so any general chapter meeting that involves the whole chapter is held on campus, reserved through campus, done in accordance with campus policies. We run leadership meetings at the house. None of our leadership boards are more than 20 people.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, Councilmember Schwarzman.
Yeah, I have one more question for you.
Stay up here.
I know, sorry to keep making you stand up and sit down. In relation to the special events permits, you know, we've heard that it's been a long time since we've actually had a special events permit that seemed like you know, was going to be a noise issue. And I'm just curious, in general, and I know you can only speak for your fraternity, but is it the pattern now to have your more organized large events at your house, or do you frequently have them off-site?
Any large-scale event, you know, that we foresee large attendance at, we do at a third-party venue. I would say when you live with 17 other, mostly 18, 19-year-old men, the possibility that someone wants to go outside their room, sit on their property, and place noise at 7, 8 o'clock is likely. It is. You know, I mean, you guys were all young at once. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Wow. I'm so sorry, but all I'm trying to say is that me as a 21-year-old president of a fraternity, it can be difficult at times to regulate the behavior of people who are, for the first time in their lives, living by themselves. I try my best, but again, I'm also an engineering student. I have a job, other obligations. It's not 100% possible all the time to babysit 18 and 19-year-olds.
I can appreciate that. And I have a 16-year-old, and I was a Cal Poly student at one point. And I've also had many Cal Poly students live next door to me. And they, you know, I think we are all interested in having a community where we are good neighbors to each other. And I know that I have always appreciated neighbors, Cal Poly students or otherwise, who let me know when they're going to have a party and are quiet by 10 or 10:30. So just wanted to kind of, you know, we hear you.
Yeah.
And we want you to be constructive, good neighbors, and we want to be good neighbors to you as well.
I appreciate that. And as stated in the conditional use permit, if we were to get a special events permit, we would notify anyone within a 300-foot radius or property line, whatever it's stated as. Regardless of not having applied for any special events permits as of yet, anytime that there is foreseen noise, you know, whether guys want to go outside and play music, I personally and other leaders at the house do personally go to our neighbors and inform them of such. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions from my colleagues for the appellant or the applicant. For the appellant, do you wish to use your extra 3 minutes at this time? Okay.
Unless you had questions or something.
No, I'm good, thank you. Okay, so we'll move forward to public comment. Do you have any public comment, City Clerk?
Yes, we have 3. Brett Cross, Sandra Raleigh, and then Felicia Lewis.
Good evening, Council. Brett Cross. I'm speaking on my own behalf and not of a group or organization. Obviously, what's come up is that this use permit is revealing some deficiencies in the city's use permit process, which includes the monitoring and the conditions. And it's been a long time. Apparently, way back in the day when I was on the Planning Commission, we reviewed a use permit for a fraternity, and I voted no. Not really sure why. It was so long ago. There was one mention about fines, and fines may or may not change a person's behavior, so we shouldn't rely on fines to try to get behavior. That just doesn't really work. You know, there's 19 recognized fraternities by Cal Poly. And I think the community development director has rightly pointed out that staff time and resources, when we look into the future with those use permits, apparently only 6 have use permits. And so that leaves, you know, another 13 out there. And some of those homes apparently are in R1 and R2 zones, so they wouldn't be allowed anyways. The other 3, I believe, may be in R4 zones, so those are going to require use permits. So one of the things I sent a letter is that you're required really to make that determination or that finding, which is really important, that this use doesn't have an adverse impact to those living on site or near the site. And you really need to consider that. Do the conditions of this that you're seeing in front of you allow you to make that determination? And I think there's going to have to be some work on that before you can get to that point. I just want to, Thomas mentioned something about young men, and he's absolutely right. I'm surprised I made it to this age. And one of the things is that your inhibition centers don't, you know, get fully developed in your mid-20s. So if you can make it to your mid-20s, you got it made. I want to just read something. It was from a court case in 1967, and it was Long Beach versus California Lambda. And so the court, made some comments, and one of the comments was, and it said, speaking of college students generally, the court observes that it is a matter of common knowledge and well established that groups of students are for the most part exuberant, boisterous, and hilarious, and don't ordinarily keep regular hours, and are addicted to the use and abuse of vibrant and sonorous musical instruments, which I thought was kind of funny. But it's a different kind of use. It's not a typical R4 use. Thank you.
My name is Sandra Rowley. I'm currently the chairperson for Residents for Quality Neighborhoods. And the one thing that I wanted to stress was the primary consideration of this appeal is that we are discussing a residential neighborhood where people live, work, and sleep. Amplified music, whether it's DJs, bands, whatever form of amplified music, has proven to be very disruptive to residential neighborhoods, as discussed in correspondence from those living in the area. During the Planning Commission meeting, Landakai's rep, Thomas Seimer, said he was confident in the fraternity's ability to make a positive impact of the chapter on the surrounding community. And we certainly hope that can happen. But in the meantime, there have been several noise complaints at that facility. We encourage the use of third-party venues for any large gathering, since, as I said, it is a residential neighborhood. It's important for the fraternity to accept responsibility for all noise violations on the property, regardless of the street address. Thus, we request that all addresses on the property be annotated as Lambda Chi Alpha. And this applies to the police department because they don't focus on APN, they focus on street address. So there would have to be the annotation in there, which there is for other fraternities. According to the Community Development Director's correspondence of today, the City Council could amend the conditional use permit, including conditions 14 and 16, to state that no exceptions to the noise ordinance shall be granted to this property operating under conditional use permit, and we recommend that that be used. Last thing is a threshold to trigger. The 1 year sounds great until they're all due at 1 year at the same time. Secondly, in my former job, we had the saying, people do what you check. So if it takes a year for somebody to say, hey, you don't have, or you had these violations, that's like not punishing your kid until a month later. So we're looking for something that would trigger an immediate, and maybe a time frame needs to be put in here, because as we saw from correspondence, one complaint was submitted 8 months ago and nothing happened. So, 8 months is a long time. You need your hand slapped before that. I think that's it.
Thank you so much.
After Felicia Lewis, our final speaker is Stu Jenkins.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor Stewart and the City Council. I'm here speaking on behalf of the community. I am an alumni of San Diego State University, so we all know we're the party school. But what I would like to say is that what we all agree is that the current legislation and the rules, they're failing everybody. They're failing the kids, they're failing the residents. And I also believe that there are wonderful kids and there are bad actors. And so a lot of the kids who want to do right are being punished for the activities of the bad actors. So what I think is that 1 year review, that's unreasonable. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to the residents. I don't even think it's fair to the fraternities and sororities who are doing the right thing. So what I think on behalf is that I think that I've spoken to a lot of the kids, and I think most of the kids want to do the right thing. But what I think is that it's unfair to put the onus of the kids and the fraternities to rat out the other fraternities. It's not fair for them. It's not fair. And it's not fair for the residents. And I think that, you know, by the time, let's be reasonable, by the time there's a noise complaint, by the time the police get there, they've already dispersed. And I've seen a lot of the emails, and I think that what we have done as a city and the city council, we failed the kids and we have failed the residents. So I think we need to take a different approach. I think we need to step back. And I think before there gets to a point where we did in San Diego, it was pretty extreme. So I think that what we need to do is step back and breathe and say, hey, we need to take a new approach and consider everybody in this situation. And I think that it's not fair for the kids to have to be responsible for what the other fraternities and sororities are doing. It's not fair to them. Okay, I don't think any people here will want their other kids to have to rat out their siblings. And so at this point, I think that we are forcing the other fraternities and sororities to do what the adults should be doing. And so at this point, I think that we need to do better for the kids and the residents.
Thank you very much.
Our final speaker is Stu Jenkins.
Good evening, Mayor Stewart, council members. My dad taught at Poly, and I graduated from Poly. Had the privilege of living with the football team while I was on the debate squad. Anyway, I'd just like to compliment Ms. Walker on the wonderful video that I think gave you a lot of good information. And I have some short suggestions. There's the conditions that make it easy for staff, and there's conditions that make it easy for residents. And I think you have to balance that. So what I was going to suggest was the October review with 3 violations. But anytime there's 3 violations since the last October review, there'd be an automatic referral to the Planning Commission. You can wordsmith that. That balances it so that residents, if there's 3 violations in a month, it doesn't wait till next October. And I think for substantiation, it would be good to pin that down in the conditional use permit as a model. Photos to substantiate, video, audio recordings, and of course, witness statements. A simple complaint, an affidavit form for a complaint could be created by the staff so that that could be utilized. And I would like to remind you also, because I do a little constitutional law here and there, the right to assemble is related not to drinking or riotous activity or partying. In the Constitution, it is related to the right to peaceably assemble to petition the government. That's a whole lot different than Halloween coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that our last speaker?
Yes.
Thank you. So moving back to if there's any staff response, I'd love to give that back to you before we start our deliberation.
So we do have some draft language. We have been working on something that we think kind of is circling around a solution for condition 3. So if it's okay with you, we can put that on the screen just to start a conversation. I think that might be the condition that gives us the most trouble tonight.
I think so. And let me just ask before you go there, Councilmember Shoresman and Francis, is this around your question or do you have a different question altogether?
I have kind of a
different one. Okay. Can you? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So as Hannah's pulling it up, this is some draft language, and I will read it to everyone. The conditional use permit shall be reviewed by the Planning Commission if 1, conduct on the permitted premises results in either A, 1, or a specific number, 3 or 4, citations within 1 year. This is where we would define if it's rolling or not, or if we want to define a year, for a violation of law or permit condition. 2, that citation is not contested or upheld on appeal. And 3, the conduct for which the citation was issued resulted in adverse impacts to or complaints from residents or occupants of the surrounding neighborhood. And then it states at the time of the conditional use permit review to ensure ongoing compatibility. And we talk about this is where the Planning Commission could amend, revoke, or change conditions. And this, I think this is some good starting language for you. This specifically addresses kind of what I'm calling the trash can issue with the language that says the conduct for which the citation was issued resulted in adverse impacts to or complaints from. So, if it's really minor things, then we wouldn't make that third finding that it resulted in adverse impacts. If it's 3 noise complaints or 3 times there were more than 48 people on the premises, that would impact the neighbors. So I think that's a kind of a way to get around that issue of if there's 3 little tiny things that nobody really has much of a concern about, we're not wasting Planning Commission's time talking about it. So we will leave that up here just for part of your discussions, but I think this is the condition that maybe there's the most conversation, and then we're happy to address any of the other conditions or recommendations or changes as you deliberate.
Thank you. I think there's more questions for you, so don't go far. Councilmember Shoresman.
Thank you. Yes. I believe I just want to clarify something because I believe you said earlier that there are about 20 conditional use permits currently in place.
Yes.
And I think the appellant's video said there are only 6.
So those are, I think, 6 fraternities. There's also sororities, and some of the CUPs we have on file, and it's possible and likely that they just have vacated the premises and we just don't know yet. So for example, this specific site had a fraternity or sorority there up to 2020. And so until we know that they've been gone for a certain amount of time, we still have that CUP on the books. But I think that 6 number wasn't considering sororities as well that have those conditional use permits.
Okay, so there are, I'm still confused. There are 20 on the books, but 6 of them are only confirmed to be actually fraternities or sororities right now?
I haven't, no, I think they were just referring to 6 fraternities.
Oh,
so
okay.
The remainder are likely sororities, or there might be 1 or 2 that maybe aren't operating right now, but we have CUP on the books.
Okay, and then another question that I think came up in their appeal was the issue of the number of people that can be there. I think the issue is really specifically overnight, probably is the biggest concern, between 10 and 9 p.m. or not 10 p.m. and 9 a.m. And I think the question was, can you explain the number 48 that would technically be allowed there? Some of the other conditional use permits have the number of residents or allowable, I don't know if it's beds, or could it be 24, I guess is the main question.
I'm going to kick this question to Hannah and Rachel. We have an explanation of how we got there. There's not a code requirement of how we get to the limit, but we've based it on generally what we've done before in conditional use permits, and there's a little bit of a formula. Hannah, can you explain that, please?
Verify. Prior approvals for CUPs for other fraternities and sororities have utilized 1.5 times the average population density in the zone. And so it takes into account how large the site is and times it by 1.5. And so there is the assumption that the 1.5 kind of that ratio, that multiplier takes into account the consideration of things in the vicinity, parking, parking availability, kind of building areas on the site and so forth.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question, Cal Poly was brought up earlier, and that these are, organizations essentially associated with the university, and the question about whether or not we would report to the university if a CUP was revoked. Do we regularly report other types of just violations if we have is that information that Cal Poly is interested in using for their own benefit or for their own disciplinary or whatever other purposes?
I'm not going to speak for them, but I will say, I contact when we get the complaint about the fraternity that's going to Planning Commission next month. I let them know that we have a fraternity that their CUP will be reviewed. We don't tell them every time we get a notice of violation, but if there are kind of repeat issues, we have a conversation about it. And, we've offered throughout meetings with them to be proactive as well. I think, there's enforcement and there's also education. And we need to help educate students on how they can comply with the code. And so, John Mezapeza has done a wonderful job meeting with students and the Panhellenic Council and staff to kind of walk them through these issues. So we have an ongoing relationship, but there's nothing, as far as I know, that requires us to send that information. It's a more informal process because we have a working relationship.
Not necessarily a formal triggered process.
Correct.
Okay. And then one more question, I guess this one kind of relates to this. The way I'm reading the draft language here, items 1, 2, and 3 all would need to be present in order for the review to happen by the Planning Commission, right? I see an
Yes.
and in there, so. Say there's 3 violations in short succession, would the review happen in close proximity to when the violations occurred, or would we stick with what was being discussed before, where there's just an annual review in whatever month you choose? I'm a little concerned about if they all happen at once and then we wait, 8 months for the annual review. So
Yes.
What's your thinking on the way this is worded and that relationship?
As it's worded right now, I would read that as being a rolling year. So violation 1 starts the year, and just within that next 12 months, once you get to 3 or 4 or whatever the number is, you're going to Planning Commission. I think if we wanted to make it a specific month, which to be honest makes it easier for us, but there are other challenges with that. I think one thing to consider that I was just thinking about as I was sitting there is there's so much turnover in these houses. So if we wait a year, and it's October, those actions would have likely been prior tenants, or at least partly prior tenants. And so there is some merit to the idea that it's a rolling year. But as read, I would read that as violation is tomorrow, and then they have 1 year to get to 3 or 4 before we send them to Planning Commission.
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense to me. I don't know if we can articulate that, but again, for clarity with turnover, if there's a way that we can, I don't know, say rolling year but within 1 year of the first citation or the first violation, something like that might be a more clarifying.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. City Manager, did you want to input?
Thank you. I was going to suggest that if there was a concern about really memorializing the sort of rolling approach, that I was going to suggest very similar language, that within 1 year of the initial violation or
violation.
Yeah. But then it would, any prior would be.
Continual rolling year.
Would you ever get to 3? If we're talking 3 as an example.
3 is
then,
the threshold for review.
So the way it's written right now, we haven't landed yet on whether it's 1 or more than 1, right? So if it's 1, it would be from a year of the violation. So basically, if you get 1 violation in a year period, then yeah, I think we would measure it then from when that occurred. Have you gone 12 months without a violation? If you've gone 18, then you're probably okay. Then that starts your new year over again. Does that make sense? So, but if we're talking more than 1 violation, then I think language like 1 year from the first violation would take care of that. We'll keep thinking about it.
I see different looks on different people's faces, and so I think you understand what I'm getting at, so I'll kind of trust you to keep maybe wordsmithing this. And you're right, we haven't come up with a number yet, so more to come.
Okay, on to Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you. And are we just doing questions, or are we deliberating in questions? Okay. Okay, good. So I just had, wanted a little clarification about the clustering of the addresses, which totally makes sense in terms of that if there's a noise violation, that it's for the whole parcel. I understand that to be the intent. Is there anything that actually needs to be written either as a condition or just to coordinate with SLO PD so that they don't, so that they know what to do in that moment?
So I think there's 2 issues at hand here. I can speak to the zoning violation issue, and then I would ask the chief if he wants to add anything to come on up. From the zoning violation issue, if, let's say, on Monday we come to the office and we hear, hey, something happened at one of those addresses, we consider it all the same site. So if it was the Foothill address or the other address, we would say, check 1 for this CUP on this site. And we would add the 3 or 4, regardless of the address that the police department, if it was noise related, that the police department cited. I think the separate issue is repeat citations from the police department, separate and apart from this conditional use permit. And for that, I'll hand it over to the chief.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Allow me to expound a little bit. So these are human interventions because our systems really don't interact that way. And so when we talk about repeat offenses, all this is going to have to be researched on the back end. And that's why the benchmark of when we do this review is important, because that's when we'll be able to go back through our databases and pull those trigger points. So when you talk about blocks, I believe was your question. And so that's something we can check, is the address in proximity to the other addresses listed in the CUP. And our system can be programmed to do that. However, it's going to take a human to sit down and do that. And so with all of the different permits throughout the city, it's going to be a pretty intentional process. So I just didn't want to leave the council with the illusion that if someone gets a citation, it automatically routes and then code has this information, because it's going to take staff in that process to collect that data.
So just to make sure that I understand, so I'm really thinking about the first violation is, X dollars, and the second violation is Y dollars. So kind of a strictly SLO PD path on that. Will you be able, do we need to do anything here with these conditions of approval in order to make that clear? Or is SLO PD automatically going to do that block, whether it's manual or whatever that process is? I think we all have a shared intent. I just am checking to see if we need to add clarifying language, or it's just a process question at the PD.
I would defer to our city attorney, because we have other violations that, first, second, and third, and I believe those are routed or caught through the court when they're sent over to the court, but I don't want to misspeak and will allow the city attorney to provide some clarity.
I believe there are annotations for first, second, and third violations where the officers issue, but I want to be clear about these 2 separate processes. This is a zoning process we're talking about. Those 2 systems do not interact at all as currently configured. And I think that if we're asking PD to understand when they respond to a unit that it's part of a larger zoning permit track when you're asking PD to do zoning enforcement. That system's not going to work as it currently works right now. That's not how we do it. They track addresses. I think there can be, as the chief was saying, annotations made to connect addresses, but that is not currently how the system's configured, and that's a programming issue. And I don't know how complicated that would be. Something I would defer to IT and records and Christine Wallace on, but that's not something that the officer's currently going to be able to access through the CAD system and understand that we're on a second or third violation when they go out to site currently, by parcel versus by address.
Thank you. Can Councilmember, you don't have to take it off. Councilmember Francis. Hold on one second. You'll have to turn yours off, Councilmember Francis. Oh. Sorry, thank you. City Attorney. That's okay.
But that doesn't mean that if 3 separate citations for the first tier get issued to 3 units on that same parcel, and then those are sent over to zoning, then they're going to catch that on the use permit side if this is what we're doing. So that's the interplay. Sorry, I'm just closing the loop.
Correct.
Thank you. And then Councilmember Francis, you want to follow up?
Yes.
Hold on one second.
Just one small thing, because I was hearing concerns about kind of the resources needed in order to do this citywide, but it's my understanding that we would only be doing this for this particular conditional use permit, right? Because this is just the language, it'd be confined to this particular one. Is that correct understanding here?
Tonight, yes. If, we also would look at this for when something goes to Planning Commission for re-review, or if someone else comes in, but yes, we can't retroactively apply it to the 20 that exist.
Great,
So,
I just wanted to be really clear on that, since if we're asking for this, the resources would only be confined to whatever it takes to program this one particular property.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it's also been mentioned numerous times, template, precedent, so yes and. Yes. City Manager?
Thank you. I just wanted to make one clarifying point as well when we're talking about the way that our police officers respond and the information they have available, that the conditional use permit itself and some of the conditions that apply to things like noise and when they're allowed to have, parties or concerns like that are specific, it is actually in their CAD system. So they do know that there is a CUP that applies to this particular property for a fraternity use and some of the conditions that apply to them. They will be able to see that a CUP applies to multiple addresses here, but it's the back end, it's the tracking of how many citations have been issued here at that time. They won't be able to know that. So I just wanted to assure everybody that our officers are well versed in CUPs, where they apply and what the conditions are, so that you're aware, that they are aware of that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I think I love the logistics we're getting into for a good reason, and I do think there's a little bit of how that works may not be the actual purpose of today's appeal, so I don't mean to push us off, and I do think this is all very important, and we can get into that a little bit more, but at another date. But let's talk about this one permit first. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm through with questions. I want to start doing some deliberation and just make a few points.
I have a few questions before we get to that point then.
Okay, go for it then.
Thank you. I try to let you all go first and then. So as far as it's been brought up a couple of times that we don't really know if a CUP of a Greek organization has gone inactive. And so I'm wondering, is there more of a process that we need to enact so that we know when it's inactive? It seems as though the university knows if their fraternity and sorority is inactive.
yes, and I didn't necessarily mean inactive, like they don't exist, but maybe they moved out of that house and they just don't have a physical address. So, because we were very address-based, so, right, so.
And so is the university, that's why I asked this question.
But the answer is yes. And that's part of us looking holistically at this of, getting contacts annually, understanding who's at what house annually. I think it requires a great partnership with Cal Poly to help feed us that information, and resources are our end to make sure it's up to date. But the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. And then I understand, I spoke to the Dean of Students today, and I understand there's different Panhellenic rules around the alcohol, allowing or not allowing alcohol during parties, and fraternities not having that same rule. And yet the difficulty is we as a city cannot make a gender-based rule. So I feel like that's probably a statement more than a question, but am I correct?
Yes, I would say.
Great. Thank you.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of creating some of this tension as well, is these different rules that were brought up by the appellant in some of the public comment emails. Unfortunately, I feel as though it can't actually be considered in this CUP conversation. Am I missing something where we can consider that?
For conditional use permits, really the conditions are meant to address your ability to make the findings. So I think when you look at what the proposed use is, as proposed by the applicant, can you make the findings for health, safety, welfare with the conditions or not? So again, it's site specific, but it's always tied back to those findings.
Right, thank you so much for that. And then we talk about maybe a number 3, who knows? But regardless of the amount of violations, does what we have now cover if there was an egregious violation?
So I would say what we have now requires that number. I'm not sure, I haven't looked lately, but Hannah, I don't know if there's another condition that says, sometimes there's a blanket condition that, the director has the ability to send it back to Planning Commission for X. Another option, and I think that's kind of the benefit of the way it's written now, is it's just one. So if it's one egregious event and we get a letter about it or we get a notice, it's going to Planning Commission. Hannah, is there a blanket condition?
As how it was originally drafted, was more of a blanket condition. The way it was written was really, as long as staff receives any sort of substantial written complaint, that would trigger a re-review. But in this modified version here, as redlined, it would require a certain trigger point. And so there could be some additional direction if, let's say, we can add on to this condition to provide an alternative path if, let's say, there was a certain complaint that you wanted the Planning Commission to re-review.
Thank you. City Attorney?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm looking for the language in your code, but I want to point out this is mandatory review, right? This is shall language versus what is discretionary with the Community Development Director on issuing on permit violations generally. And so I will look through the code and see if I can point you to that specific provision, but my recollection off the top of my head is that there is that discretionary language lying with your Community Development Director for egregious violations, notwithstanding what the mandatory language of your use permit maybe.
Great, thank you. And then lastly, it's really a question for Cal Poly, but it could be a question that you have the answer for. Is there a guesstimate timeline for Greek Village housing in the master plan at Cal Poly?
I do not have the answer for that. So if we'd like to invite Cal Poly up, I believe they are here.
If y'all have that, that would be fantastic to know.
Oh my goodness. I didn't even know she was here.
Hello, Mayor Stewart, council members, guests. Joe Campbell was with you recently with our housing presentation. So our current plan runs for about the next 6 years for the 4,000-ish beds we are building. After that, our plan would be to go to the north side of campus And that's where we talked about the possibility of a Greek village. So it would be several years out from today.
Great, thank you so much. All right, that's the last of my questions. Councilmember Marks?
Thank you. Well, this is, I really appreciate all the work that everyone has done, and I think the appellant's, the presentation in the video was really excellent. And this is a citywide problem that has existed for decades, and we cannot solve the whole thing, the whole dynamic on the back of this one CUP. But I did want to say that I think it's really important that Cal Poly is notified if there is a violation or if the CUP is revoked. It's really important. I think that we do refer criminal activity from the police department to the dean of students or whoever in the, and so I feel that that is something that we should include. Also, no exceptions to the noise ordinance. I think that's something we could just put a line in there in this CUP, and it would relieve the anxiety in terms of the neighborhood, but also it would introduce some kind of clarity for the fraternity. I'm concerned about the idea of a review in October because of rush, and having lived in on Albert Drive and student neighborhood for over 30 years, I can tell you that there's a lot of activity around rush that goes on. And also, there have been some extremely unfortunate and dangerous, and in one particular case with Carson Starkey, I don't know if any of you remember him, but he died because of hazing around a rush event. And so if we would do some kind of review every October, by that time rush is over. And so I feel that it's really important that we not, that we have some kind of response to these different violations that doesn't have to wait a whole year before it's addressed. Also, there's a turnover. The students keep graduating, which is what we want, you know, we want them to graduate. But there's turnover, and also the kind of culture in a fraternity. My son was in a fraternity at UCSB, and it changes from time to time, partly depending on the leadership. So I think a situation where if there are, say, 4 violations in 4 months, that they're dealt with immediately and that we don't wait until the next year, because it might not even be the same human beings. I mean, it might even be different people. So I don't know exactly how to arrange that, but we could say, we could look at 4-month frame time, you know, a time frame of 4 months rather than a whole year. I believe that's about what a quarter is, although they're going to semesters. But you know, we to me, a whole year, I can understand administrative convenience is very important. Staff resources are very important. But this is an ongoing problem that, in my experience, has actually gotten worse over time. And so at some point, the city has got to say, all right, we have to address this. We have to step up. The other thing that I wanted to say is that I think the appellant's request that the language in previous CUPs with fraternities be re-included in this one, I think that that's a reasonable request. They're saying that the language is on page 2 of their appeal that says failure to comply with any of the above conditions or code requirements or the conduct of the use so as to constitute a violation of federal, state, or local law, or constitute a public nuisance. impacting the health, safety, welfare of persons in the vicinity of this use is prohibited and may constitute grounds for the revocation of this event. Excuse me. So I think that kind of language, again, is pretty straightforward, and it also will give the students notice that it's not just noise, it's not just the trash can thing. It's actually, if they violate the law, that could mean that they would lose their housing, essentially, as a fraternity. So I think.
Are you looking at number 3 in the memo? Just want to make sure I'm following. Is that from that?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Right here, this one. Yeah. So I agree that we need to, with Vice Mayor Pease, that we do need to have some kind of timing trigger in condition number 3. And to me, 3 months or 4 months would be a decent time frame. I don't want a situation where a new crop of fraternity members ends up in some way being punished for what the guys did last year. So I don't know how to wordsmith all of that, but those are my thoughts at this time.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Shorsman.
Thank you. Yeah, you hit on some of the bullets that I was going to hit on, so that's great. I just want to thank everybody for all the time and energy that you've all put in. Thank you to the fraternity for trying to do the right thing and be a good neighbor to the community. We all appreciate that. And I also just want to remember, some of us have said this, but we're really here to talk about one permit. It's easy to like pan out for us that are policymakers here trying to think big picture and look at the overall impacts of this. And there are some impacts because this can be used as a template, but I think it's also important to point out that it seems like the Community Development Department and the Planning Commission are really making an effort to, maybe if we're using this as a template going forward, to still take each case as it is individually, because no two parcels are going to be exactly the same and have all the same circumstances around them. So I really appreciate the Planning Commission. I think, you know, they worked to make this a better document, and they added some conditions, and it is a better document because of what they added, but it's not quite there yet. I think we're doing a really good job tonight of tweaking things, and I'm confident we'll come up with the right language for this item number 3. Just to kind of key in on this again, I think I think we're all still a little struggling with the number of citations or violations. Again, there's that language: violation, complaint, citation. It looks like in this one, in this redlined language, we're talking about, let's see, conduct a permanent premise citation within 1 year of a violation or a permitted condition. So if we're going to talk about citations, and that's going to be the thing that we focus on, then we should probably look through the rest of the document and make sure that the language is consistent throughout if violations or complaints are referenced elsewhere. So maybe that's just a trigger for staff to go back later and kind of look for those things to make sure that we're being consistent and using the same terminology throughout the document. I also wonder, you know, to kind of cover that issue, Councilmember Marks said, you know, maybe we should look at it every quarter. I guess I'm thinking maybe there's an or type of solution where you have 3, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4, I don't know. I guess I tend to slice it down the middle and think 3 is maybe a good number. 3 violations, it should that it should be taken to the Planning Commission after 3 violations, or yeah, I don't know how to deal with the egregious thing. I don't know that we can deal with the egregious issue. It's easier if it's a number, unless there is discretionary language that the Community Development Director can have. But I guess what I'm saying is maybe it should be 3 violations, or within a time period so that there's the option to either do both. I'm still not articulating this very well, but just throwing that out there as another way of thinking about it. I agree with Councilmember Marks that we should stick to the Muni Code even for special event applications. I think that would provide some clarity to the community member and the residents that we are always going to follow the municipal code, even if there is a special events permit issued. And then I also was going to mention adding that language, one more condition that just kind of reiterates what is already true, but failure to comply with any of the above conditions or code requirements or the conduct of the use so as to constitute a violation of federal, state, or local law, or so as to constitute a public nuisance, or so as to cause adverse impacts on the health, safety, and welfare of persons in the vicinity of this use is prohibited and may constitute grounds for the revocation of this permit. I think it just solidifies and adds clarity on that point for all involved. And I think if we are able to kind of wordsmith these things, and I'm curious to hear what others say, but I'm prepared to support this conditional use permit.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you. And I won't belabor the point here, but I do really appreciate Lambda Chi Alpha going through the process here. And I hope, if nothing else, this has been the ultimate civics lesson, you guys getting to come to all of these hearings. And I also really appreciate the concerns that are being raised by our community who are most impacted by, these conditional uses in their neighborhood. Just kind of going down and keeping it really confined to the things that we need to refine here. I like where Council Member Shoresman and I think the rest of you are going with the idea that it is an annual review, but it's rolling as well, in the sense that if you hit the 3 complaints, and that's kind of the number I'm feeling comfortable with at this point, and it's 1-2 months into the year, then it's they can come up for the Planning Commission. I know that's a harder thing to keep track of, so that annual review is there as kind of a catchment to ensure that you're going back reviewing how many complaints have come through and making sure that they're adhering to the rules of the CUP. I do want to make sure that I just reiterate that I want that annual review there, particularly to make sure that we're updating all of the contacts, particularly property owner contacts, as well as fraternity-specific contacts. I really like the idea of any, and we needed to talk about complaints versus citations here, but any citations or complaints applying to the entire property, not individual addresses. And I know that presents some challenges for the police in programming, but I'd like to try and work through that so we can refine that process. Agree with Councilmember Shoresman and Marks on the limiting any special events permits. I think confining the language around what the community development director can approve there so that we're not extending hours of noise violations or anything along those lines. And I believe Councilmember Marks had brought up the idea of making sure that we have notification of Cal Poly written in there. I would agree with that provision being added in, as well as the blanket language that was mentioned by several of my colleagues up here, ensuring that if there is an egregious violation, that the community development director has discretion to review that with expedience. And I believe that hit on all of the major points. Did I miss anything there? One quick side note, if I may, and I think several of you have sort of gotten at this, Mayor, with your questions earlier. I'm a little frustrated that we're dealing with this. And I'm wondering if there's any appetite, and I know we heard from Cal Poly that this is in their plans for 6 years out, but that feels like a really long runway. And I'm sure to our community members who are hearing that, maybe 6 years that they'd start to address this issue. there's be an appetite to direct staff to work within our legislative platform to write a letter to Cal Poly to get them to, I know, letter writing, what's it going to do? But I'd love to encourage Cal Poly to move with a little bit more speed on the idea of a fraternity row on campus. And I think a little bit of pressure from us can't hurt. I know they have 4,200 beds they're working on building right now, and this is not a tomorrow issue, but this is maybe something that we can light a little bit of a fire and try and move this process along. So this is just me throwing out a temperature check for the rest of you to see if that's something you would be, aside from what we're doing tonight, willing to direct staff to do. And that's it for now.
Thank you. It's a good communications conversation at the end here. Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you, and I'll follow along to kind of knock out the relevant pieces of information. I agree that condition number 7, which talks about the contact information for the on-site person, that it should be added language for the property owner to have a name of an individual. I support that kind of blanket language that Council Member Marks brought up, and others have concurred in terms of that this can be revoked. I had, I've drafted like 3 different versions about the hybrid of number 3, and this is working for me, what's up on the screen, and adding that it's a 1-year period. So if there are 3 violations in a month or in 6 months, anything, that will trigger it. So I think that I don't think of it as an annual review. I just think that this is a frequency review. So if you are able to just do 1 or 2 violations in a year, that's, golly, that can happen to anyone. But if you are having kind of repeat offenses, that would be triggering this. So, and I think that captures it. I would add back that language that you had already proposed about the cost. Just making sure that we capture that as part of the original one. Sorry, contacts, condition. And adding to, I guess it's condition 16, which is about the special events, and that would be an appropriate place to say, through a special event by the community development director, comma, within the city noise ordinance and other relevant city ordinances or something like that. So I think that's an appropriate spot. As I'm reading this, basically, if they want to have more than 48 people just for a party, they need to get a special event. And that seems, I think they get that. And so, but that can be done without asking for a band or extra hours to get that special event permit with all those other conditions. So I think that covers all of the pieces that I had.
Thank you. I do think there's going to be we'll go to enforcement for a second, then I'm going to come back to where this appeal is. I think that there's a really bigger enforcement issue that just doesn't quite click here. And I think that's a conversation for, I guess, major city goals of 25, 27 and work plans. But just to imagine if you had every single member of the fraternity members who live at this spot happen to have a partner who slept over that exact night, I'm not going to go count how many people are sleeping in that house at that moment. So I guess I kind of am a little bit perplexed as to how we're going to count the number of people still, but I'm going to leave that alone. If the appellant and the applicant are both comfortable, then good for you, and that's fine. I also think the 9 a.m. is still a bit strange, but I don't have any problem with that, and that's fine. I do really also want to follow in Councilmember Francis's footsteps and say thank you to Lambda Chi Alpha for being above board. I think even the appellant mentioned that in their comments, and really want to work with you to be able to make this successful. I do think a contact name is great idea, and I think that should happen. And I don't mean to be a little bit cynical, but I happened to, a long, long time ago, work in a large property management company that was not in this area, and the amount of turnover is huge. So I also worry about how do we expect one exact contact name to always be there. I leave that to you to operationalize, Director Tway. I also leave it to you to operationalize putting something in place so that you will know when a organization does go inactive. As Thomas was gently pointing out, there is that address that comes out every single year from the university, and just trying to figure the address list and figuring out how that works. I think that the rolling year is fine with me, and if the 3 citations or the 3 substantiated complaints is how we're working, then I agree, Councilmember Shoresman, then sure, go through all of the language within the CUP. That makes perfect sense. I also think that a memo at the end of all this makes a lot of sense to say, all right, we went back through this as staff, and this is where we saw that substantiated complaint need to come into play. That being said, I also agree with Councilmember Marks as to, I don't want future people to be disciplined or responsible for past people's behavior. And so where that rolling year happens, I am concerned for that. Is quarterly sounds cumbersome from what I'm hearing from staff versus October, but I also hear October being future tenants, not necessarily the current tenants. I hear it being during rush or right after rush. So I'm not sure that October makes sense. Again, I'd love to have you, Dr. Tway, and your team really come back and operationalize that and come back and share what that looks like, whether it's a memo or what that looks like. But I don't think we have to say October or any specific time in this CUP to be able to approve it today. Sorry, I just want to make sure I've gone through. I'm fine with memo 3 in that statement that was read by Councilmember Marks and Shoresman. I don't need to read it too. And
It was in the appeal.
Yeah. I'm just saying I agree with it, and I think that's good. And I think that it's been mentioned a couple times as to how this could be an example or a template or a precedent, but I also heard Director Tway share that each of these are looked at differently. So I want to make sure that each CUP is looked at differently or independently, and not always taken as the last one, because I don't think that that's necessarily always the same. And for a minute, I will share some of the frustration also, Councilmember Francis. I feel like sometimes lately I feel like the city has received from the university either kind of a bit of a Heisman or a hot potato, like this is yours now. And I feel frustrated with that. I feel really frustrated with that. And I'm just gonna share that to you to take that back. I can't do much about that in this conversation with this appeal, but we'll talk about that at a future time. And I will go on to Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Well, I'm just looking at the language that is in red there, the newly proposed condition number 3. I'm wondering if we said the conditional use permit should be reviewed by the Planning Commission if, 1, conduct on the permitted premises results in a specific number of citations within a 1-year period or earlier for repeated violations of the law or permit condition. I don't know if that would do it. Would that, wordsmithers over there, would that do, but I'm wondering how to actually put the language in to make it be a rolling thing.
But isn't within kind of allow the or earlier? Because you're saying within
earlier,
this time.
Yeah.
City Attorney?
If the conduct, if the conduct on the permitted premises results in, I'll say 3 citations within a 1-year period or earlier for a violation of the law or permit condition, then that would indicate that if September and then October and then Halloween, then it's off to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, that's within a year either way. City Attorney?
No, but within a year, I think that could raise the inference that we're going to wait a year before we look at it. So I don't know exactly what language would you suggest to make sure that it's a rolling kind of thing and not an annual?
Does it help to say within any 1 year period? Because that makes it clear that it's rolling. So whether it's in a 1 month or a 1 year, that if you've got 3 within a 12-month period of one another, it doesn't matter whether it's October. You don't have to have a base violation. It's just anytime we get one, we're going to look back and go, were there 2 prior in the last 12 months? So I don't know if that solves the problem.
Well, you tell me,
I'll
you're going to have to apply this.
I think Director Tway would like to share.
Is that the blue language that I see that has appeared?
So I would recommend adding the conditional use permit shall be reviewed as soon as practicable by the Planning Commission if, and then continue. So it's getting at the kind of, should it be within 3 months, should it be with 6 months? It's giving the community development director that as soon as you can, once you hit 3 violations and it's within a year period, you go to Planning Commission. So I think it helps kind of hit home this issue and also address the, hey, don't wait around forever to take this to Planning Commission issue. But as I read this, I would read this as a rolling 1 year period.
Okay, if that works, I'm fine with that. And I don't know where we'd want to put the referring to Cal Poly. I don't know where you'd want to stick that.
I would stick that at the end of this condition, in the event that it is referred to the Planning Commission, the director shall notify Cal Poly in writing of this action.
Okay.
So after the word revoked at the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Shorsman.
At the risk of continuing to wordsmith, I'm looking to see how this turns out here. Shall be reviewed by the Planning Commission as soon as practical if one conducted on the permitted premises results in, okay, you've added the number 3, citations within any 1 year period. Yeah, within a maximum of a 1 year period, or I mean, I think that's the goal, right? Is we don't want it to go longer than a year.
Yes, and that's how I would read this. So our admin citation language currently says within any 12-month period. And that is how we read a rolling. So maybe we align this with that so that it all means the same thing and says the same thing.
Love that.
Okay, love you, lovely. I'll let you do that then, and it'll be consistent and with what you're used to. The one other thing that I was gonna talk about was the special events permit, and I think trying to figure out where best to put the stipulation that even with a special events permit, you must, CUP holding organizations must still follow the noise ordinance. Would that be best with condition 14 or 16?
So we had played around with this language in anticipation of this conversation, and we had thrown it into both of those Hannah can pull it up, but it clarifies at the end of all of those that no exception from the noise ordinance shall be approved by the director as part of a special event permit. So just be clarifying that that is not on the table. Okay. And we added that to, condition 5, 15, and 16.
Seems well covered then. Okay.
We also, is 14, can you pull up 14, please, Hannah? She's pulling it up. So right now, 14 says the fraternity shall comply with Table 1, exterior noise limits of Section 9.12.060, exterior noise limits between the extended hours of 10 p.m. and 9 a.m. And we would propose to be consistent to remove the language that says, except as approved in writing in a special event by the Community Development Director. To be just across the board, you cannot violate the noise ordinance, so we would add that to condition 14.
Perfect. I think that's well captured. And so we only notify Cal Poly in the event of a revocation of a conditional use permit, or you do it informally through your other channels if you're experiencing a property that's getting a large number of complaints. Okay, I think I'm content with that. I just want to make sure that we are, attempting to utilize the resources and the authority that Cal Poly has to kind of, help us with this issue. As other council members have mentioned, I too am, frustrated with it feeling like this all falls on us, and these are not necessarily just our residents, they're community residents and Cal Poly residents as well. So appreciate them all being here today and continuing to be our partners in this. And I'm ready to make a motion if everybody's okay. Okay, I will make a motion to approve staff's recommendations and the revisions to the conditional use permit as we've been outlining here.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks.
I'd like to second that.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, can we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Shorsman?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pease?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes, the motion passes 5-0. I want to thank the appellant and the applicant and its staff time. I know it was a lot of information and a lot of changes in detail. Often I get comments that, gosh, the council's always 5-0. They just believe everything all the same. And I think today was a pure conversation around what works and what doesn't work and how we need to constantly keep communicating to make those changes. So thank you to our partnership with the Cal Poly and continuing to work with us. And I know we have more to go. On that note, we'll move forward to communications. Did you want to move forward, Councilmember Francis?
Yeah, well, a couple of quick things before we dive into the meat and potatoes there. Last week, had the privilege of getting to go to the Passenger Rail Summit down in San Diego, which was an amazing education in all things trains. Got to take the San Diego trolley down with Sandag staff to the border and look at some potential proposed modifications to their transit station down there, as well as potential expansion of the low sand corridor all the way down to the border, which was rather exciting. Our own Slowcog Pete Rogers did a presentation on emerging corridors, which has been emerging for 30 years, which was kind of the butt of the joke, but really interesting to see. We're on the cusp of so many big things with train transit, and that was just really exciting to see all of these people's hard work coming to fruition. And then also was with several of you down at the dedication of the Chumash Marine Sanctuary dedication on Indigenous Peoples Day, which was an incredible experience. And again, it's same sort of language of 30 plus years of people's work manifesting in the celebration and dedication yesterday. And just, quick side note, it was just unbelievably beautiful. The fog was there and lifted during the ceremony, and there were hummingbirds overhead and butterflies coming through the ceremony. It's just really special, and we're so privileged to live here and to live in, with the work of the people who are really working to make sure that all of that's preserved for future generations. And to take a hard turn here, I wanted to come back to that conversation to see if there was an appetite for potentially trying to encourage conversation about expediting some of this move to get Greek life more on campus. Had a conversation with staff that pointed out that there are 20 conditional use permits for fraternities and sororities currently. 12 of them were issued in all of the history of Cal Poly, and then 8, so almost doubling the number in the 2000s. And so this feeling that a lot of people have that conditions have sort of changed on the ground and in the neighborhoods is substantiated by the fact that we are seeing more of these fraternities and sororities in the neighborhoods. And I think it's really important that we have this conversation, a frank conversation with Cal Poly about this.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Yeah, well, there are only conditional use permits in zones 3 and 4, and R1 is where we have the satellite fraternities. That's a whole another problem, which is not on the agenda, so I won't go into it. So on October 3rd, I got to go to the dedication of the new student dorms at Cal Poly. It was great. The background of the speakers were big bulldozers and things. They actually broke the ground. And also a number of us were at the groundbreaking of the Kaya Joaquin Motel 6 supportive and permanent housing for low-income people. On October 7th, I went to a dedication, and our city manager was there as well, a memorial service for the people who were killed when Hamas invaded Israel, and also some personal conversations from people who knew some of the people who were hostages. And it was very well attended, very somber occasion. And then on the 9th, I went to the Diversity Coalition annual fundraising event, and I don't know, were other people there? You were there? Yeah, that was cool. That was great. But it was also wonderful to see the kind of community support for the basic principle of diversity and equity and inclusion. And then on the 10th, Anderson Hotel ribbon cutting, which I think most of us were at. And again, more units of supportive and supportive housing, and also just low-income housing for disabled people. On the 13th, I went to the fire department open house, which is always so much fun. A bunch of kids running around with little plastic fire hats on and watching a car be demolished by the firefighters. I mean, they were actually breaking windows and smashing a car. And, you know, of course, there was no human being in there, but they were demonstrating jaws of life and like that. And then on the 14th, Indigenous Peoples Day, and I'll hold this up, Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary designation is coming up on Wednesday, tomorrow. And then the next step is that the governor, it goes to the governor, and if he does not reject it, then there's a 45-day waiting period, and then the designation actually begins, the operation by NOAA. And our city was recognized by Violet Sage Walker as being the first city to declare October 14th as Indigenous Peoples Day. And also the support that our city has given to the project over the decades. So that was wonderful. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Schwarzman.
Yes, I think I have a couple of things that many of you were at, but I don't think anybody's mentioned them yet. So as shortly after our last meeting, we had the home key groundbreaking ceremony at the Motel 6. I don't think I heard anybody mention that yet, but many of us were there. Oh, you did? I
called it Kaya Joaquin.
Oh, okay. That's why I missed it. And then the following day, we had the Chang Park rededication of the park at the corner of Marsh and Santa Rosa. So beautiful little pocket park, so to speak, that you all should go check out. It's in incredibly great condition compared to what it was before. And I know staff has worked long and hard to both improve the aesthetics of the location and be true to to the Chinese culture as well as just make it function better than it did in terms of the pump mechanics and all of that behind the scenes. So happy to see that little piece of joy back into the community. I was unable to go to the Diversity Coalition meeting because I was out of town, and so I missed a whole bunch of great stuff, including the Anderson ribbon cutting, but looking forward to many more to come. So, and in terms of, back to your question, Councilmember Francis, about, a letter to Cal Poly to kind of express or ask for support around many of these fraternity and sorority issues in our neighborhoods, in addition to the R3, R4 conditional use permits that we were talking about tonight. I also wonder, maybe, I don't know if a letter to Cal Poly is the most productive, or a letter to the CSU. I guess I would kind of look to our city manager to see, what is the best way. I feel like we talk to Cal Poly a lot, and they have this built into their plan. It's just further out than maybe we would like, but they're also working on other things that we need at the same time. So how can we be supportive of them meeting our communal needs best with our advocacy?
That's a great question, and I think something we should definitely talk about more. I think that, I've shared with City Manager that I think it would be great to have a conversation with the president of Cal Poly as well as his staff. Courtney Keenan was here earlier, and really just kind of having a sit-down, genuine just conversation about how these things seem to be building up, and have a little more of the town gown conversation that I think needs to be had. It's been a slow change, and it's just kind of continuing to get worse, and been like, well, city, you should take care of that. And there's been a lot happening on campus from my understanding, but not told to the community. And so I think there's just some gaps in communication, as well as maybe asking them to do something differently. So I would love to have that conversation with the president and with the city manager first, I guess, and see where they're going, and are we missing some things maybe that they're not sharing maybe out in public, and kind of go from there. But I do think a letter of sharing our frustration could be nice, could be good, but would it actually do something? And I'd like to actually get to the point of outcome. I think I agree with you, Councilmember Schwarzman, that I'd like the 4,000 housing units they're building currently to happen. So it is hard to say, and we'd like you to move up your Greek Village. I don't know that's necessarily the priority that I would put. I think some of the overall neighborhood wellness is probably a bigger issue that I hope to see on our major city goals next year. That is somewhat when it comes to the city and Cal Poly working on this together, because it's not just us. I'm going to go back to the communications report, though, and then go from there. I won't go over again the Kai Joaquin, the Chang Park. Those were amazing. I will highlight the Haslow Hotel Anderson Apartments grand reopening, though, just to, again, thank Congressman Carbajal and Assemblywoman Addis and the members from the bank and the housing community department from the federal government for all coming out and really sharing their support that they have done, not just financially, but also in person. I want to thank Daisy Weiberg and for coming out and having the conversation about homelessness with me on the Dave Congleton show. And I appreciate that Dave gave us this time to just kind of share what we were doing. Obviously, there's so much more to go. And I also want to share about the La Loma Adobe annual tour and open house, thank you. It was a lot of fun, and also just so educational every time. There was a wonderful dedication to Norma Frey. If you go out there now to La Loma Adobe, there is a nice sized rock that has a plaque that shares about Norma and all her work. She was just really a key person in this. And when I went there, one of the things they said over and over and over was, thank you to Parks and Rec, thank you to Parks and Rec. They were so helpful in making this happen. And they specifically named out Ranger A.J. Jansen. So I want to say that from here in the public dais because I think there was just such gratitude. And then I appreciated that ASI on Tuesday put an Every Voice Counts panel on. They invited the registrar from, not the registrar, I apologize. Oh, I always say that. The county clerk and had a representation from their office. They had Congressman Carpahall, Assemblywoman Addis, and myself, and talking about how every person's voice counts and how that vote really matters. And as I always say, that people marched, people died for the ability to have this vote. And so no matter who you vote for in this election, please get out and use your right that you have. So I will say that out loud to everybody. And I don't know that we really want to put Cal Poly on a future agenda. Is that what you were hoping for, or just the letter?
Well, I was hoping to leverage our legislative platform and our housing goals to further the conversation in whatever format is most helpful.
Great, thank you so much. Councilmember Marks.
Yeah, back in the day when I was the liaison to their master plan, it was really a high priority to have a Greek village is what they're calling it, not a Greek row, but an actual kind of housing, like theme housing, you know. However, in the latest iteration, it seems to have slipped in their list of priorities. So to me, another place that we really need the help of Cal Poly, and this is, again, it's not on the agenda, but the whole thing of satellite fraternities, which RQN is really how it meticulously, you know, keeping track of, that is what actually has turned the Alta Vista neighborhood and to some extent the Buena Vista neighborhood into something like Isla Vista. And that really was a big factor in my family's deciding that we were going to leave that area. We love that house and our home and all that, but what that means is that they are fraternities, not sororities. They are fraternities. They're doing these satellite R1 operations, and I don't think that either Cal Poly or the city has really gotten a grip on it. You know, it's just kind of out of control. The other thing that is about that neighborhood that's unique is that it's a hilly neighborhood and there are all these hills on the campus. And so once the noise and the music starts, it's almost impossible to tell where it's coming from because it echoes off everything. So even like the 300 feet or whatever, that's not the question. So it's actually exacerbated by the topography. But anyway, I don't know if that would be neighborhood wellness or, in a way, tenant protections, because they also cram in all these people. You know, I don't know exactly how to grapple with that problem, but I do think we need to recognize that at least one part of the city near Cal Poly has kind of been taken over in a Isla Vista sort of mode, and what do we do with that? And at one point, Derek Johnson was saying we need to have an overlay on, we need to like basically say, all right.
It feels like we are straying.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. I will stop. I'm getting tired and it's late and we have a lot to do tomorrow, so good night.
Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation. I feel like we're in a point where there's not really a agenda item we need to create, so I'll move us forward to ending. And as we talked about earlier, we do have a rescheduled date for our next city council meeting, so we'll see you all on November 12th.
All right.